see what I can do this summer. It's 19 years old, though. Oh, are you going to stand, Blair? Or? Oh, okay.
I don't know. I'm not sure. The podium's already down. I'll just leave it, I think. I don't know. I'm going to give her this.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know. Should I move this thing up? I don't know. Is the protocol to have the board move down?
Whatever works best for you. Usually when people stand there, they do like stand there, but whatever you still be able to.
Are we ready to go, Madam Clerk?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. I'll call the Community Issues Committee meeting then for Monday, May the 25th to order. And we'll start with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains, and we pay respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also located in the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region Number 3. Madam Clerk, can you do a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Here.
Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Crowson.
Here.
Councillor Hagan.
Present.
Councillor Morrow. Councillor Mirashiro. I believe he said he was going to join the meeting at 2 p.m. Acting Mayor Parker.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Kaufman.
Present.
Mayor Spearman.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mayor Spearman, who has some special comments.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Kaufman. Today, I'd like to acknowledge our retiring city manager, Jody Melly. We have a small acknowledgement of your work for the last few months and your work over the last few decades. Certainly, we'd like to say thank you on behalf of Lethbridge City Council. Today is Jody's last official meeting for the City of Lethbridge, and we wish her very well in her future. Good health and happiness in all you do, and thank you for your dedication, professionalism, especially over the last few months as the city and the community, the world has gone through a very unique time and certainly a very challenging situation. And we certainly thank you for all you have done over the years on behalf of the citizens of Lethbridge.
Thank you very much, Mayor Spearman. It's been quite a career. I know you talk about decades, and it's true. I'm nearing 40 years of service here at the City of Lethbridge. I often tell people I started when I was 6, but that's not quite true. But I was 19 years old, and my mother, I think I was between jobs, and she was either afraid I wasn't going to make my car payment or perhaps move home, and so encouraged me to apply for a City of Lethbridge job, and I ended up here, and it's been an amazing career. I've been involved in all sorts of things. I was reflecting the other day, everything from being involved in I think our admin staff review and salaries when we reviewed them back in Bob Bartlett's days. I worked for Paul Petrie, who told me I could be anything I wanted to be. I worked for Brian Horrocks, who said I could call myself anything I wanted to as long as it wasn't city manager. Now he's eating his words. But I've appreciated the support that the community has afforded me too to serve, and thankful to all the administration and most recently my colleagues, and happy to turn the keys over to Mr. Dalton, who when I was checking in with him, I think probably about a month ago, when we first started connecting, I was like, "You're still coming, right?" and here he is. So I'm very happy to be turning the keys over to him. He and I will continue to work together as he transitions, and I've offered my support to do that for him. And thank you very much for the opportunity to serve. I feel like Celine Dion. No, everybody sit down.
Yay, Jody. Thank you very much, Jody. And I think I said this a couple of weeks ago when we appointed Craig the CAO. I know that when the CAO search committee came to you and asked you to take on the role, it was a much different world, and I think there were some other things you were wanting to accomplish, but you have definitely done yeoman service getting us through this and keeping us headed in a very positive direction in very, very difficult times. And I don't know if this is the pinnacle or feather on your cap in your career. I know that you've done many other things and taken on many other roles, but we certainly have definitely appreciated it. And it's definitely been my honor and privilege to get to know you over the years, and I thank you for your service to the community. Are there any other members of council that wish to make any final comments to Ms. Melly? Madam Clerk? Is there anyone in the queue?
No, there's no one in the queue.
All right, hearing none, I will move on then. We'll move to the approval of the minutes. I have a resolution from Councillor Higgin. Be it resolved that the minutes of the Community Issues Committee meeting of City Council held on Monday, May 11th, 2020 be approved, and the Deputy Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to sign and seal the same. Councillor Higgin.
If there are no changes, I call for the vote.
Hearing nothing, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Hearing none, that's carried. To the adoption of the agenda, as circulated, Madam Clerk, do we have any additions to the agenda?
No, there are no revisions to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a resolution from Councillor Campbell that the agenda of the Community Issues Committee meeting of Monday, May 25th, 2020 be adopted, including all communications as submitted by the City Clerk. Councillor Campbell.
Call the question.
Question's been called. All those in favor? Any opposed? Hearing none, that's carried. Moving into presentations, we have a presentation from Facility Services Asset Rationalization. I'm not too certain. Is Carrie Nightingale, Sam Conrad, and Blair Richter there presenting? If they are there, please come to the podium, and away you go.
Okay, thank you for having us today. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide an update on the work we have done with Facility Services in regards to the Phase 1 review of the operation review by KPMG in 2019. More specifically, we're going to speak to the asset rationalization framework that we developed based on Council's previous resolutions. Next slide. Brief history to bring everyone up to date. On December 10th, 2018, Council initiated the operation review during the 2019 to 2022 operating budget deliberations. On January 24th, 2019, City Manager Strain provided a progress update to Council, essentially kickstarting the process. From January to March of 2019, procurement of Phase 1 is completed, and KPMG is selected to perform the review. Between May and October of 2019, KPMG performs the Phase 1 review on several city business units, Facility Services being one of those. And on November 25th, 2019, City Manager Strain presents the Phase 1 results to Council, council then follows with several resolutions regarding the results. Next slide. So corporately, KPMG identified a few key findings. The first one is a higher service intensity. So the city of Lethbridge has a higher service intensity compared to other mid-sized cities. Things like high operating costs, high number of assets, and high staffing levels. They also identified a significant number of business units, a lack of performance management and reporting, and an opportunity for a more robust capital planning process. Next slide. For the Facility Services business unit in particular, KPMG had 4 recommendations. Number 1, asset rationalization. KPMG identified that the city of Lethbridge owns more building space compared to select peers, and that we should look at divesting of some of these facilities. Numbers 2, 3, and 4 are administrative, and they are to standardize service level agreements and leases, explore opportunities around the reporting structure of the Facility Services business unit, and the consolidation of property management services across the organization. Next slide. So according to KPMG, the key opportunity for Facility Services is asset rationalization. The city of Lethbridge owns approximately 3.2 million square feet of building space, and when compared on an area per capita comparison against select peers, we tend to be on the higher side. So we wanted to actually do our own comparison. You'll see the last bullet on this slide here says that KPMG states that the data may not be strictly comparable due to accounting and reporting differences. So we actually want to do our own comparison. So part of our process was to actually reach out to other municipalities and get a better understanding of what type of building portfolio information they had. We reached out to Ontario municipalities because they were the ones identified in the report, and we also reached out to Calgary, Medicine Hat, and Red Deer. Of all the Ontario municipalities, only 1 responded, and Calgary, Medicine Hat, and Red Deer were only able to provide fractions of their portfolios. So it was a bit of a challenging exercise for us, and it made it difficult for us to do our own comparison. Next slide. So on November 25th, 2019, Council passed 2 resolutions regarding asset rationalization. The first one to develop an asset rationalization framework, and the second one to develop a draft policy for divesting of city facilities, which is what we're here today to talk about. Next slide. So part of our process was to actually assess and validate KPMG's assumptions. KPMG estimated a potential cost savings of $15 million by rationalizing assets, which is a combination of one-time asset sales and the elimination of the ongoing operating costs associated with those facilities. So KPMG assumes we would sell buildings at $3.25 per square foot, and we'd have an operating cost savings of $4.50 per square foot, regardless of facility type. Next slide. In the report itself, based on some of the calculations, they actually imply we would sell up to 60% of our building area, and we should actually sell buildings with the lowest facility condition index. Well, this actually refers to buildings in the best condition, so I'm not sure that was the best strategy, but that's what KPMG identified. Next slide. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sam to speak to the building portfolio.
Thank you. So these next few slides provide further context regarding the city's building portfolio. The city manages a diverse building portfolio of approximately 345 buildings, and they range in size from small storage sheds to large buildings like City Hall and ATB Phase 2. As you can imagine, the city of Lethbridge, like many municipalities, owns a very diverse facility portfolio, so swimming pools, arenas, administrative buildings, maintenance buildings. Quite diverse, and like I mentioned, they range in size quite significantly. And it also includes structures that aren't your traditional building with a roof and 4 walls, but things like skate parks and gazebos, lookout towers, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. So this chart provides a breakdown of the building portfolio by service category. So as you can see on the top right, the different shades of green represent the facilities that provide core services to the city of Lethbridge. So the dark green are the infrastructure buildings. So this would include the water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, the various electrical substations, lift stations, and so on. Operations buildings, like the Fleet Services building. Administration buildings, like City Hall, the old courthouse, and Stafford Center. The various fire stations and police headquarters facilities. The gold and yellow sections of the pie chart represent the community buildings. So these are the buildings that the public would be most familiar with. So rec and culture facilities, swimming pools, ice arenas, and so on, or buildings that support a community service like the transit garage. And the city also recently acquired the airport facilities. The total square footage on that chart is about 2.78 million square feet. KPMG's report referred to about 3.2 million square feet, but that's because they included about 380,000 square feet of leased facilities, not managed by the city, so primarily the exhibition facilities. It's important to realize that the exhibition and the Park Place site properties are excluded from the chart. Next slide, please. So this bar chart represents a further breakdown of the community buildings, so the gold and yellow sections of the pie chart. As you can see, the largest facility, ATV Center Phase 2, which just opened last year, followed by the NMAX Center, the Park and Ride facility, recently constructed, and ATB Center Phase 1, and so on. So as you can see, 18 buildings, the 18 that are shown there, they represent the majority of the square footage of the community buildings, about 81%. The remaining 130 plus community service and rec and culture buildings and structures only account for about 19% of the square footage. So as you can see, the city's building portfolio is comprised of very many small facilities and very few large facilities. Next slide, please. So back to the asset rationalization exercise. In KPMG's report, they spoke about asset rationalization and identified that in order to implement asset rationalization, one would need to consolidate facility cost and performance data and factor in things like the replacement and renovation costs, life cycle backlog costs, operational costs and their trends, the functional performance of buildings, demand projections, and whether or not there's any redundancies in service. Next slide. So working with that, our approach to asset rationalization, and it's important to realize that facility service already continuously monitors certain aspects of building performance. So we already do have some data regarding operating and maintenance costs. We agree that the exercise of asset rationalization is really about assessing the performance of city facilities by considering the associated costs and the functionality. We also recognize that asset rationalization could be used to inform any asset-related decision, not just divestiture. So the framework could be used, for instance, to evaluate a new construction, a renovation of an existing property, the acquisition of an existing property, as well as a divestiture. Another important consideration is that the asset rationalization framework does not rationalize the service provided at the facilities. This is just about the performance of the asset itself and not the service provided. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the service rationalization is an equally important and related process, and it would be done in conjunction with the asset rationalization. It would need to be done, like I mentioned, it's not part of the framework we've developed, and the asset or service rationalization could take on a variety of forms. An example would be something like the Recreation and Culture Master Plan, some sort of document that would identify that, yes, this is a service that the city would like and it's supported by City Council. So the process and development of the service rationalization, we've considered that to be separate from our exercise. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Sam. So this slide identifies what our proposed asset rationalization framework looks like. It's important to note that facility services already uses a portfolio approach when we're looking at our life cycle planning. So in many regards, we are already informally following this process. And although this framework was formalized for the purposes of the resolution...
Participant exiting.
For the purposes of the resolution, it's also going to serve as a useful tool when to inform our other asset decisions as we go about our business. So the workflow starts with step 1, which would be to identify the facilities for review. Then we would identify the stakeholders, proceed to gather and analyze the information. Then we'd be in a position to start evaluating and scoring the facilities, which would lead us to a recommended action. Now, as Sam had mentioned earlier, a parallel process of a service rationalization framework would be helpful in informing the recommended
Announcing
action.
participant.
Carlson.
Next slide, please. So step one, to identify the facilities for review. So there could be a multitude of different triggers that would start us in this process. Obviously, in this case, the operational review and council resolutions are what's triggering it presently. But other activities that we perform, such as our life cycle implementation planning or our asset inspections, would also bring us to this first step in the process. When we assess our existing facilities, some of the considerations that we would look for would be poor physical condition, poor utilization, poor functionality, and high operating and life cycle costs. If we're using this process when we're looking at new facilities, additions or renovations, it would be triggered by a CIP cycle or based on user or business unit request. Next slide, please. So step two is to identify the stakeholders. In this step, we would determine who would be impacted, who could help provide some information, and who would take part in the evaluation process. Stakeholders could include City Council, user groups, business units, finance, Solicitor's Office, Real Estate and Land Development, and the Senior Management Team. It's important to note here that not all of the stakeholders that would be identified would necessarily be involved in each step of the process, and that role clarity would be very important. Next slide, please. So step three, gathering and analyzing the information. So this step would be the longest and most labor-intensive of all the steps. A reminder again that this step is going to be about the asset and not the service that's delivered from the asset. And it's also important to note that, as Sam had mentioned previously, we already collect a fair bit of this data, so we already have data available to start this part of the process. And the data that we do gather in this step would be both functional and financial. So for existing facilities, we would get data from our condition assessments of those facilities, as well as the operating cost data and life cycle requirements. We would look at utilization data and perform functional review. If we're looking at new facilities, additions or renovations, this information would come from documents such as business plans or master plans and the capital and operating cost estimates that are typically included with those documents. Next slide, please. So step four is where we begin evaluating and scoring the facilities. For this step, we'd review the evaluation criteria, establish the weighting for each of those criteria, and score the facilities. Here you can see two columns broken out into both the functional and the financial considerations. For the financial score, we would
announcing participant.
Rob.
We would evaluate based on the four criteria noted here, which are location, functionality, utilization, and versatility. For the financial impact, we would consider the operating costs and the life cycle requirements. So just to elaborate a little bit further on the life cycle requirements, this is going to refer to the aging components and systems in a building which are reaching the end of their useful life. So like most municipalities, we are given a set amount of funding and we typically prioritize the critical systems over the less critical systems. So when we're doing life cycle replacements, we would choose to replace a roof over painting the walls. By doing this, it creates a reinvestment backlog, so that's what would be captured with this life cycle requirements component. Also important to note for this part when we're going into evaluating and scoring the facilities is that we're proposing to group the facilities by building type. So essentially creating sub-portfolios. For example, we would evaluate all the fire stations together or all the arenas, thereby allowing us to put a specific weighting for that building type and get a score that reflects the important factors for that particular building type. Next slide, please. So just to further evaluate on the four functional criteria that we've established, again, because we are going to be doing sub-portfolios, the questions that might fall under any of these four categories could vary depending on what's important for that building type. Here we've identified a few of the questions that we would identify. For location, we would look at whether or not the building was conveniently or appropriately located. What does the accessibility look like? And is it in a vulnerable location, such as a river valley or a floodplain? For functionality, we'd look at whether or not facility had adequate parking, or if the barrier-free accessibility was adequate, whether or not the building was functional for its current use, if there was adequate integrated technology, or if it was environmentally efficient. As far as utilization goes, this is where we would look at the facility operations and gain understanding as to how well it's used during its operating hours. What are the operating hours, and how often is that facility operational during the course of the year? For versatility, we would look at how adaptable the facility is. Can it be used for multiple purposes, and how easy is it to adapt to multiple purposes? Next slide, please. So that brings us to the evaluation matrix that you see on the slide here. The top portion of the matrix identifies the functional factors. The lower portion addresses the financial factors. The 4 criteria are identified here, and in the second column you see where we would assign the weighting. So as I mentioned before, if we're looking at building groups, you could have a sub-portfolio of buildings that may have a weighting of 25 for location, 25 for functionality, 25 for versatility, and 25 for utilization. And then you might have a different building type that would be weighted 50 for location, 10 for functionality, 10 for versatility, and 30 for utilization. But in all cases, the total wouldn't exceed 100. That allows us to take the different building sub-portfolios and have a relative comparison between the building types. Then we would apply a score to each of those criteria, which would result in a weighted score and a total functional score for that building. For the financial factors, the operating cost and life cycle requirements, that data comes from a previous step, and those would be pre-populated to give us a total financial impact. Then we take those 2 numbers, the total financial score and the total functional score, and we plot both of those on a chart, which Sam will review. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So as Carrie mentioned, the exercise before would provide a functional score for the facilities and a financial impact score. We could then take those 2 data points and plot the facilities on this chart. And depending on where a facility would land on this chart, especially in relationship to others of a like kind, so fire stations or arenas, depending on where the facility lands, it will help guide what sort of decisions should be made regarding that asset. Next slide, please. So if a building happens to have a high functional score and a low financial impact, then this would likely be a building that you would keep in your inventory. So in the case of an existing building, it's probably something that no action is required. The building's performing well and it's not expensive to operate. For new construction or the acquisition of a new building, a building might land in this quadrant as well. Especially in the case of new construction, it would inherently be designed to meet the functional requirements of the user group. It would be designed to be efficient and inexpensive to operate. It would be well situated. And there would be a sound business case demonstrating that it will be well utilized and a master plan supports its creation or acquisition. The next slide. If a building happens to have a high functional score, but it's expensive to operate, one would just need to consider why the operating costs are so high and determine the appropriate action. So it might be that an energy efficiency upgrade could reduce the operating costs. It could mean that the repair or upgrade of a building component is required. Or perhaps it's to be expected. So if the building operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, then it makes sense that it would have high operating costs. So a building where recently a lot of life cycle work has been done was over at the library with the roof replacement and interior renovation. Next slide, please. If a building happens to have a low functional score, but it's inexpensive to operate, this might be a building that's a good candidate to be repurposed or renovated or perhaps even relocated. So then you would consider if the building is just poorly situated. For renovation, could it improve its functionality, similar to the major renovation project that was done at the Yates a few years ago? Or perhaps the building will suit the functional purposes of a different occupant, and maybe it's just a matter of repurposing it. Next slide, please. If a building happens to have a low functional score and is expensive to operate, then this might be a building that's a good candidate for divestiture. But prior to doing that, one would need to consider several factors. So for instance, future building or land requirements. So it might not make sense to have the facility in today's inventory, but it might at some point down the road. Risks of selling and reacquiring the facility. So could that asset ownership eventually return back to the city? And if so, what condition will that asset be in? The market value. So can the asset even sell, and for how much? And if there were any grants that supported the construction or renovation of the facility, there may be obligations in the grant that prevent the city from selling that facility without incurring some sort of penalty. Next slide. So with that evaluation, we've come to the last step, which is to recommend an action. So at this point, a report could be generated that would include the scoring from the above exercise on the previous slides, along with the chart and recommendations from administration, again, regarding the performance of the asset itself. Layered on top of that would be the supplemental service rationalization framework and the results from that exercise. Those two pieces of information together would be able to, or would be provided to inform what sort of decisions you made regarding that asset. Next slide, please. And with that, I will turn it back over to Blair.
Okay, the facility divestiture policy is included in your handouts. Before we created this policy, we actually did a bit of research to see if there was other policies from other cities out there that had similar policy that we could leverage. We found some that were similar in nature, but none that were an exact replica of what we needed, so we developed our own. Like typical policies, it has a purpose, policy statement, and this policy in particular has the methods and authorization levels of divesting of city facilities. So this is going to be a council policy, and it's going to be a complement policy to the existing real estate and sales policy, which is CC 45. And the policy itself makes mention of the asset rationalization framework that we talked about today. Next slide, please. So next steps is for council to consider the facility divestiture policy and the asset rationalization framework. Next slide. So that concludes the presentation. I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Kerry, Sam, and Blair. Appreciate the information. We've got a couple of people in the queue. I'll start with Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you all for your presentation and for your work on this. My first question is, how many of our buildings are historically designated?
I want to defer that to Kerry.
Thank you for the question. I would say that we probably have less than 6 that have historical designation. Some have municipal, some have provincial, but we're definitely under 6, and they would be on the smaller square footage side.
Would you be applying the same framework to them?
In those cases, the 4 criteria that we listed for the functional points would probably have different weightings based on what would be anticipated for the functionality of a historical building. We had mentioned on one of those under the functionality criteria that there was integrated technology requirement. If we were looking at, say, something like a building like the Bowman, which does have designation, there would be special considerations to how invasive we would get before we would hit a tipping point where integrating technology may not be the best solution for that building, in which case we might consider that building then, or the occupants of that building, to be repurposed to a different facility if we we're no longer meeting the needs of the group that would be in that building.
Okay. I know you're not talking about the service in the buildings, but I hope you can appreciate that from a council perspective, that is quite vital. How many of our buildings are home to outside organizations that are not City of Lethbridge departments, et cetera?
How many of the buildings are outside?
Yes. So how many, like the YWCA, et cetera, how many have organizations in them that are not city departments or city staff?
Right. I would say there's probably a good portion of the facilities that are in that situation. That our administrative buildings would primarily be Stafford Center, City Hall, and some of the public ops buildings. But a lot of our smaller square footage buildings have are used by user groups, as well as some of the large ones like the ATB Center. That one's half city staff and then half user group staff.
And would you be foreseeing that the same framework is used for those buildings, as well as ones that actually are fulfilling city mandates?
Yes. Yeah, same framework for all. Whether it's a fire hall, a city hall, or an ATB center, we'd apply the same framework. We would just adjust the weightings so that it suits the expectations of that building or the services that can be provided from that building.
Thank you. I'll step out right now, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Croson. I should have indicated before the questions as well, Councillor Miyashiro has now joined us, and I think Councillor Carlson has a better handle on his technology and won't be popping in and out much anymore. Councillor Hagan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Question I have is, one of the first slides talks about testing KPMG's assumptions, and it was noted that the city would sell the buildings with the lowest facility condition index, which was somewhat surprising. So those that were in, obviously, the best condition.
Right.
And then later, towards the end of the presentation, is that we would want to speak to, these buildings that are in good shape to not sell, if I understood correctly, because the maintenance, et cetera, on them is limited and they're efficient, et cetera. So it's kind of a conflicting. I'm just wondering if you can explain a little bit about that, because it started off sell these ones, and then after it was keep them.
Right. And I'll answer part of that question, and then I may defer to Blair because he did most of the research in getting back to KPMG, getting some clarification on what they meant in certain sections. But just generally, yeah, we did find conflicts throughout the report that we needed clarification on. Some parts that didn't really make sense, that we would sell all of our good assets or our new ones. So we had made some assumptions that maybe some of that was typos or mistakes, and we sought clarification on that. So I'll turn it over to Blair, and he can kind of speak a little bit more to what he found out. But there were
you did get clarification from them, but it was still in here, so we still have that same.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, we did get clarifications, but it probably wasn't as black and white of an answer as we would have wished to have received. So from that point forward, we used the report plus the clarifications, and then developed our own interpretation of what would truly make sense for City of Lethbridge. Obviously, selling a brand new ATB center at $3 a square foot probably isn't a decision that would make sense. So in order for us to get a process that we could apply to all facilities, that considered the facilities appropriately, and could plot the findings in a chart that started to group buildings in various categories so that you can kind of hone in on where your focus should be for buildings. That's what we spent our time developing.
Just a follow-up to that, and understanding how we do life cycling through the city, that we're actually very good with keeping our buildings maintained. And so going through this, seeing that some are lesser, but they're still well maintained, even
That's
those
right.
ones that are lesser than, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do when we're doing our life cycle planning. And again, if you want more details, Sam can obviously speak to this, because this is a large part of what Sam does for us. But when we do our life cycle planning, as I mentioned, we prioritize the key systems, the major risk systems as far as replacement. So even if you go into one of our buildings and perhaps it hasn't been painted for 20 years, the mechanical systems, the roof systems, all that are well maintained.
And last, if I could, Deputy Mayor, look at the clouds. So going through all of these different metrics, you're going to take into account, obviously, the cost for us to maintain them, staffing, as opposed to leasing back some of the space if it's so required, correct? That's all fits into this when we analyze what the final cost is?
Right, that's the intent, yeah.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hagan. Mayor Spearman.
Thank you for the presentation. I guess, will this help us in the future? For example, the YMCA building, owned by the city, we learned a year or two ago that this building would be, the better decision would be to knock it down than renovate it. Will this help us avoid that situation in the future?
Well, as I mentioned, the framework that we developed for the purposes of the resolution has already been part of our decision-making process when we're looking at life cycle replacements and what to invest in and what can wait another year or two. So I believe that we are well positioned on our facilities right now and with the way we're doing our life cycle planning, which is in alignment with the process that I presented here today. So I think that we will be in better shape. We have a rigorous planning process and asset inspection process as well. So we do, or currently are finishing up the process of going through every one of our buildings and assessing all the components in a building as far as their condition and future needs. So I think we will be in a much better position than we were with the YMCA building.
Thank you. So the essence of the KPMG recommendations is that we spend more on building maintenance than other comparable communities. Will this review help us, one, be more cost effective and maybe be more focused on what we're spending maintenance dollars on?
On the maintenance dollars? I'll turn this over to Blair to answer. Thanks.
To answer your question, yes and no. The Facility Services Department does provide valuable maintenance programs to their systems. However, they do still have a significant backlog in maintenance. The backlog itself is at in my opinion, a fairly pretty consistent industry standard. Obviously, too much of a backlog is a risk. Not enough backlog means you're over-servicing your assets. So yeah, definitely this part of the process will help identify if we should scale back or increase maintenance on certain facilities.
Okay, thank you. I guess my last question is, do we tend to overbuild in the city of Lethbridge? And I recognize there's some nuances. For example, we have a police station that maybe other municipalities don't have if they don't have their own police force, specifically in Alberta. But do we tend to have larger facilities per capita, if you like, than comparable municipalities?
So based on the report, we were compared to against many Ontario municipalities, and we were definitely higher than them. Comparing ourselves against Medicine Hat and Red Deer, we actually fall pretty close in line with them. We're actually quite a bit lower than Medicine Hat and a little bit higher than Red Deer. So I think Alberta faces a different situation than Ontario, meaning that we have more of these segregated communities, and we provide these services to a larger regional population than Ontario might. So,
I think strategically, what council needs to understand is we're spending a fair bit on facilities, if you like, and our taxes are relatively high compared to other municipalities across the province. And strategically, how will we manage our tax burden from this particular sector? Are there opportunities to reduce the tax-supported costs of this sector?
yeah, so I think part of the process is for council to determine which buildings to actually evaluate. If you want the city to look at divesting of facilities, there's going to be that key balance of identifying the assets based on the functional and financial impacts that we discussed. But there's also that service impact that you might have to determine. So, yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vanden Heuvel, you had something to add?
Yes, thank you. I think the mayor highlighted an important part there is when we look at the comparative communities, and Blair highlighted, we looked, a lot of the report there was in Ontario, and they have a much more regionalized basis. But every single municipality arrives at its building inventory in its own unique way. So in the past, we've been able to take advantage of different levels of government support for leveraging our dollars to be able to build new buildings and improve our fleet. And it's a typical cycle for a municipality to go through a build, a retro, a reno. And so right now, when we look at this, we can say this is where we are today, and all future decisions as to the continuation of a build cycle or whether it becomes a retro cycle, obviously come to council for their decision and support through our CIP process.
Thank you. Councillor Morrow.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't know which one of you talked about this, but you indicated that in the KPMG report, there's about 380,000 square feet that wasn't included because it's at least two other, like Exhibition Park and Park Place Mall. But if I understand clearly, we own the land at Exhibition Park, and they technically own the buildings. But if they were to just walk away one day and hand us the keys, which they could, those buildings become ours. So are we kind of excluding them for now, or these, like Park Place and Exhibition, or are they going to be considered as in part of this process in our inventory?
Yeah, I'm going to defer that to Carrie or Sam to speak to.
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question? Just want to make sure I understand.
Well, I just want to make sure. So you mentioned that in the KPMG report, Exhibition Park and Park Place Mall are excluded because a third party operates and runs them. But my understanding, and I don't know about Park Place Mall, but with Exhibition Park, they could very easily one day just decide and say, you know what, we're out of here. We don't want to do this anymore. We're losing money. And they hand over the keys, and those buildings technically come back to us. As we just saw, well, maybe not the YMCA, but that might be a little bit similar. So my question is, are these types of buildings, the Exhibition Park and Park Place Mall, and if there's any others that are in part of this 380,000 square feet, are they excluded simply because somebody else is operating them?
That's correct. So in that pie chart where we were talking about the city's portfolio of buildings that we manage, we excluded those just because we don't really have any control or costs associated with those facilities, other than that relationship that exists because of the lease.
Okay, but with Park Place, I can understand what you're saying, but with Exhibition Park, we've kicked in a lot of money to that facility, and so why would that not be part of this? Why would that not be included? I'm struggling as to why all buildings, doesn't matter, who it is, if they're on our land, why wouldn't we consider them in any of the options, the four options and the criteria that you've identified?
Oh, I see. So part of the actual assessing those facilities as part of the framework.
Right.
They could be. We hadn't contemplated including those, but yeah.
So you haven't excluded them?
Yeah, sorry. Excluded was just excluded out of that pie chart. So it doesn't necessarily mean it would be excluded from the exercise.
Understood. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation. It's open to whoever wants to answer. As you go through the assessments of all of our assets, is all of this going to be strictly data driven, or is there any room for sort of esoteric considerations about a specific building, or is it numbers are king?
The asset rationalization framework, is, in particular the scoring sheet that we had developed, that would be a very numerical exercise. So that would be weights and scores and dollars and figures. So that would be a very mathematical process with a number. Yeah. But there would be some additional considerations. So again, that service rationalization piece, that's a piece that there's no formal process yet for that. But that, depending on what that looks like, that might be more of a qualitative information that can help inform the decision.
And as you go forward and as you think, as you start the process, would you say that there's some low-hanging fruit in our assets that we have right now? Or is each one going to be open to interpretation?
Yeah, I think until we actually run through the exercise and have the service rationalization piece, we won't really know for sure until we run through the exercise.
And finally, in this the volatile world we're living in, as far as selling assets, is there any concern about getting what you can for it?
That is one consideration. Is even if we figure this facility doesn't seem to make sense for us to hold on to, there's no service rationalization to support it. We still don't know at the end of the day if somebody's willing to buy it and at what value. So.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks.
Madam City Clerk, I was just notified that Deputy Mayor had to just step off. He has another phone call, so as acting mayor, I'll be chairing the meeting. I have Councillor Carlson up.
Thank you, acting mayor, and thank you all for the presentation and information and the work done on this. It's appreciated. Acting mayor, I do have 3 questions. If you'll allow me to have 3, I'll try to make them quick. First one is the policy draft that was provided. Appreciate it. I don't see in here any timeline or occurrence of this. Is it contemplated this will be done once a council term, likely before the CIP perhaps, or is it an ad hoc as requested process?
So, Councillor Carlson, to answer your question there, the draft policy is a proposal to council for council's consideration. Council has the ability to structure within the policy a ongoing process with this, and it also can build itself the flexibility of on an ad hoc basis. But so the policy belongs very much to council. What we're proposing is that the framework that has been presented this afternoon is supported by a council policy with whatever the conditions that you wish to see in there.
Thank you, Mr. Van Hool. Appreciate that. That, I guess, jumps to my third question, which was to my colleagues around the table. I see some things that I would like to see in here, perhaps regarding timing or occurrence of this. I'm wondering if there's anyone else who sees things in the policy they may want to review or amend before it goes to council. And so would it be better to refer it to a committee such as audit to review and get council's overlay on it before it goes to council, or just go straight to council and we can bring our amendments on the first? That's my question to my colleagues. I don't think I need an answer. I'll just leave that floating. So my second question was around the framework. So thank you, Mr. Van Hool, for mentioning that. It talks about new facilities. I'm sorry, I'm trying to open it right now. One, identify facilities for review, and then it talks about for new facilities, additions, renovations. Does this need to be enshrined in policy somewhere that this will be done, or will just this framework being attached to the policy make that happen for everything?
So, Councillor Carlson, I think your question as far as what direction is required, you can on June 1st at the next council meeting when this comes forward, you can direct the policy to whether it's OEG or whether to audit for council's furtherance and look at it and create the council policy that you want. And then what you can do is you can provide direction for us to say, okay, well, we're probably not going to get rid of these particular assets. So let's remove them out of the testing, and then we'll go through a test cycle with the framework and to say, okay, give us 10 or 15 buildings that you would want to consider using this framework. We would go through the process and bring back for council a conversation of how that framework is working so that you can then say, okay, yeah, we like that, or no, it doesn't make sense. But you'll find a lot of the assets under the portfolios that Sam has identified in his pie chart are very specific purposed. So it's whether you're going to race towards a whole divestiture of a block of assets, or if you're going to consider them one-off. I think it's good for council to get comfortable with the policy, get familiar with the framework, and then decide what their next steps might be from a divestiture standpoint.
Okay, thank you. But on the question of new facilities, when we're looking at something for a CIP or even outside of the CIP, is there somewhere where this is enshrined that this will happen? Like, I like that it says that in the framework, it talks about all the new facilities and what will happen. For example, business plans, master plans, capital costs, operating estimate.
Okay.
Is that enshrined somewhere?
Actually, sorry, to answer that question for you.
Yes, having it in the framework is enough?
Actually, what in addition to what you presented here, which is the asset rationalization framework today, which is what the resolution coming from council, within the KPMG report was a whole bunch of recommendations around the improvements of our CIP process to bring about a better, more robust CIP process. And I know the facilities group has already undertaken those things to make sure that, you know, what we have is good planning documents. We have good budgets, all those types of things, all these different checkpoints that you're talking about on the consideration of any new builds. So those improvements have been talked about and implemented in the CIP process.
Excellent. Thank you.
I do believe Councillor Kaufman's back now.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Acting Mayor Parker. I appreciate that. I apologize for stepping away. I'm not working from home. I'm at home trying to work, so I appreciate the opportunity to step away there for a second. To your question, Councillor Carlson, the resolution actually does state that we're going to send this on to the council meeting of June 1st, so that'd be next Monday for council consideration. That is the report as well as the policy. Maybe based on your recommendation, what we can do is we can send them two separate directions today. Or we can certainly do that on Monday. I don't believe audit is meeting between now and next Monday, but if we wanted to do something quickly, that option certainly exists. Before we, yep, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you. I was just thinking to expedite the process, refer it from here, but if there's no meeting of audit happening, then it probably won't slow it down much if it gets referred on June 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we head on to Councillor Crowson, I have a couple of questions. Back at your very start of the presentation, you have the KPMG recommendations. I think it's the slides aren't numbered, unfortunately. It looks like it's slide 4, facility services. You mentioned that 2, 3, and 4 are administrative. Council passed a blank resolution giving the CAO permission to undertake the administrative recommendations. How far along are you on those 3 conditions?
I'll defer that one over to Blair.
Yeah. Councillor Coffin, with the remainder of, we've made this one the priority as far as a date, as far as reporting back to council prior to or on June 1st. So the primary efforts have been directed in the area of the asset rationalization. The other areas being the administrative considerations, we have been doing some work on it, but after June 1st, the work on the remaining ones will increase.
Okay, thank you. Slide 27 and the policy, both policy under recommended actions under council. I believe it says that we can ponder the recommendations. It also talks about recommendations on slide 27. I would very much like that changed actually to options. I think council would appreciate having options put in front of them instead of recommendations. If we understand the process, which I really, really like, I appreciate what you put in front of us in terms of the framework. But options coming out of it, for me personally, I think is much better. So I'd like us to start talking about options instead of recommendations, because that might afford us some creativity as well. Had you considered that in process, or was it simply falling on the recommendations?
So the recommendations were strictly from the evaluating the performance of the facility. So when we evaluate the costs and the functionality, so the recommendations were centered around that. But the supplemental information regarding the service rationalization piece, that's certainly something that it's additional information that would be provided for the decision makers, and certainly. The recommendations are from a technical point of view, but the service rationalization is that key piece that would allow for consideration of additional options.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Final question that I have on your slide, I think it's on page 4, it'd be slide 7, testing KPMG's assumptions. The city would sell buildings for $325 a square foot regardless of the facility type. Correct me, or can you please provide me with some additional information? I'm sorry if I missed it, but are you, for the purpose of testing the assumptions, just assuming 325? We would not be going to market on a flat rate like that for all buildings regardless of type, would we?
Yeah. What we can do is we can have Blair speak a little bit about his conversations with KPMG as far as, because that slide was as part of the overall recommendations. It says test the assumptions and test the information. So when Blair had the opportunity to do that, he had some conversations to be able to reconcile at the numbers that were presented in the report. So I'll let Blair speak to his conversations and the information he learned in that process.
Thank you.
Yeah, so reaching out to KPMG after this report was handed out, they actually identified, so their recommendation is to sell 10% of our portfolio every year for 3 years. In the first year, they recommended selling the buildings at $3.25 per square foot, and those would be the worst conditioned assets. And that was another thing we had to determine with them was initially they talked about selling the best assets, but they made a mistake and said, no, it should actually be the worst assets. Year 2, we'd actually sell buildings at $6.50 per square foot, and then year 3, sell buildings at $9.75 per square foot. So that's kind of where the calculation error was made in the report. And by further vetting with KPMG, they provided us with other sales numbers.
Thank you, and I appreciate you following up with KPMG for the clarification on that. We would still perhaps, though, adjust for market conditions and other factors, though, correct?
Yeah, I think there would probably be some work internally to determine a fair market value for each of the facilities.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'd like to go back to my earlier question about buildings that are leased out to organizations that are not part of the city structure. Was there any research done on the number of city-owned buildings that are leased out in other communities, or the percentage of buildings that are leased out in other communities? Do we have any comparators?
Yeah, Sam spoke to Calgary. Sam, do you want to? I'll defer to Sam. He reached out to Calgary on this matter.
Yes, thank you. I did reach out to the City of Calgary to ask them information regarding their building portfolio. And when they responded, they actually did break out the leased portion. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we do have that information for City of Calgary.
Could that be forwarded to us?
Yes.
As well as our own numbers? My second question has to do with adaptive reuse and reusing buildings. The most recent one I think people would think of is an old fire hall that was turned into the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association. So how would this framework help in making those decisions? Would the needs of the community be put first? Would building availability be put first? How would this work within the framework?
So part of that framework would be evaluating the functionality of that facility and what it would take to make it functional for that the current user. So in terms of...
I'm talking new users. I'm talking about reusing the building for a different use.
So part of that same evaluation, so it might not suit the current functional requirements of the current tenant, but as it sits, that just with a knowledge of all the other facilities and all the other user groups, without too much modification, it might suit the purposes of a different user. And so it could score well for one user, depending on their functional requirements. But if it was evaluated for a different occupant, it would score better.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Croson. Councillor Hagan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question just was on what Councillor Morrow had inquired of just in his last question regarding Park Place Mall and exhibition. Now, just to get a better understanding for the framework that's you're going through, I see that Park Place Mall obviously is going to be a large footprint. One of the bigger footprints is its the land, and obviously being in the area that it is probably a quite sought after piece of real estate that could if it was to be out there on the market, could probably pull in more than a lot of other places. Question I have, when we go through this with Park Place Mall, has there been any interest in, I mean, over the years, has anybody expressed any interest with this development, or do we know how this framework is going to, identify some of those things? I'm just curious.
No.
For Park Place Mall in particular, and you could actually apply this to any of the facilities that are kind of live in that gray zone, like exhibition and whatnot. Oh, sorry. So for Park Place Mall or other facilities that fall into that gray area, if you follow through our workflow and we identify, we're going to take a look at Park Place Mall. When we identify stakeholders as the next step, we would circle in real estate and land development, and then we'd be able to find out the information as to what has the activity been like on that, what is the city's purpose in owning the land, do we have future plans for that site, that sort of thing, and that would help inform the information that would lead into the matrix. So while we don't, I personally don't have that information right now as far as what's happening.
I don't expect.
But because facility services, we deal with the asset portion, we recognize that this whole process, while we've honed in on looking at the assets and like Sam spoke to earlier, where we're talking very quantifiable data and numbers and graphs and whatnot, we did recognize as we were going through this process that the services need to be considered, and we struggled with it for quite a long time because we were a bunch of building folks trying to determine what we're supposed to be doing with the services. And then once we decided that that is an important but separate piece, and we will focus our skill set on the building piece, that we can develop this framework and allow points where other stakeholders that have the information that we need in order to come to the final recommendation or options that we present to council, that we would bring those folks in as we're going along.
So great, thank you for that answer. So people like Mr. Kelly will be
Absolutely.
brought in to discuss this when that time
Absolutely.
does come to bring this framework back.
Yeah, real estate and land development is actually one of the very key stakeholders on any of these decisions when we're using this framework for the purposes of divestiture, because that is the world he lives in as far as what market conditions are, sale prices, and whatnot. So we would work with Mr. Kelly to help inform some of the decisions that would move forward from that, including other things that affect your sale price, such as some of our older facilities still have hazardous materials that need to be abated. So that affects the market value of those facilities as well. So.
Excellent. So it's a joint effort.
It's absolutely 100% a joint
effort.
That's what
I want to make sure, because I mean, different groups, and sorry if I put you on the spot there with that, but it's
no, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Hagan. Acting Mayor Parker, you were in the queue. Did you have a question?
I'm all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morrow, you were in the queue. Do you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Deputy Mayor. Just further to that, so I'm looking at the City of Lethbridge, the framework, where it's got the 5 stages.
Right.
Help me out here. I'm thinking back when we had the old fire hall that became the multicultural center. I knew personally, because I was approached by 3 different people, groups of people, that were interested in buying that building. But it never really came to council as an option. So do we have, because we don't know who has an interest in whatever buildings we own. do we have somehow a process in here where whoever is watching and is interested and has seen our operational review, they understand we have, extra assets per capita and we might be selling off. And so will they be able to come somehow and say, we want to buy this building, we're interested in this building, prior to even it going through all this? Because to me, I think that's important. If somebody knows or somebody wants to buy a building, and I don't see that in this process, or if it is, I
Right, no, and I would say that we haven't specifically identified that circumstance in the process, and we can certainly have more of a look in there, and that would, I would assume, probably fall into the identify stakeholders piece, and we can develop sort of what that looks like. Right now, our list includes just internal stakeholders, right? The city administration, SMT, and city council. But we can also look at a possibility for engaging external stakeholder that might be able to speak to that market interest or whatever. And again, I would see that's probably going to be tied into real estate and land development to some degree. Another item I believe that we spoke to in the presentation was just if an asset doesn't meet thresholds for being a functional asset with good financial factors and whatnot, and it becomes one of those candidates that could be considered for sale. One of the pieces that we also need to consider is that we're sitting here in 2020 and it doesn't look so good, but is that piece of land that building is actually sitting on, is that a strategic piece of land to hold for future purposes? So again, that's part of looping in all those stakeholders so that we can have those conversations and make an informed decision so that we're not making decisions now that are going to impact decisions that could or could not be made in the future. So.
Thank you. And my final question, again, these 5 stages, if everything was to fall into place, this seems like it's a lengthy process. So if we have a particular building today and we want to get to a recommended action, stage 5, can you give me an idea of how long? Is it a year out, 2 years out, or 2 months out?
Well, and I think Mr. Van de Heuvel spoke to that earlier, is that we could look at testing a few buildings. Our efforts up until now have been to develop this process, vet it against the information that we've gathered from other communities, vet it against the information from KPMG, and developed a comfort level that, yes, this seems to be in line with what we do already. It looks like a process that could be carried out pretty consistently, whether we're talking about divestiture or other purposes for facility decisions. But we have not, we've tested some facilities through there, but only just amongst ourselves. We haven't got the full group of stakeholders and whatnot engaged to actually run through it. So I agree that the next step is probably to test a few facilities, and then we'll have an idea about how long the process will take. Another point to note that some facilities would run through it a little bit faster than others, depending on how complex the operating cost data is and whatnot. So.
Sorry, so testing. So I know what you mean by that. I mean, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, so it would be to select some facilities. If we wanted to do it as a group, like let's run all the fire stations through here just to see how it shakes out, because we have some understanding of fire's master plan and what they're anticipating for replacement stations and whatnot going into the future, and see if that runs through this process and gives us the results that we would expect, just kind of as a validation to what the process would be able to provide for us. Or it could be a single facility if somebody identifies that a single facility, we just want to see how facility A runs through the process and whether it provides us the information that we're looking for at the end.
Thank you. Thanks, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Morrow. I apologize, Councillor Carlson. Thank you for your patience.
My questions have been asked. Thanks.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there anybody else in the queue?
No, there's no other people in the queue. Thank you.
Excellent.
The
Thank
mayor's
you.
in the queue now.
Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. You mentioned fire halls, and I wonder, to me, will this process allow for out-of-the-box thinking? Or will we simply look at fire halls? Because I think in fairness, one fire hall that comes up over and over again is the one on 16th Avenue South. So what we understand is 90% of the calls are for ambulances, and only 10% of the calls are for fire services. So do we have to build every fire station to accommodate large fire trucks? So the ask is, the next fire hall would be a kilometer or two down the road at a cost of $25 million, a massive cost. Would we do that? When Councillor Higgin and I were in Japan and in China, we saw fire stations built at the basements of apartment buildings. So they partnered with private developers and had a space in a private building in order to accommodate fire and ambulance services, and at minimal cost to the municipality. So can we do things differently and do things out of the box and not assume that we're going to build $25 million fire halls every 10 years?
Yes, I think the process will allow us to have the out of the box thinking, and I think at the point where we bring in stakeholders to have these conversations, it's a more purposeful step than perhaps has been taken in other circumstances. With the breadth of diverse stakeholders that we would have in the room, we could certainly explore other options. One of them possibly being what you suggested, Mayor Spearman, or whether or not, and Sam spoke to this earlier, whether or not a user group has simply outgrown their building and they should be relocated and somebody else put in, rather than doing a major renovation or a major expense. There comes a point where it seems like it doesn't really feel like you fit in this building anymore. Maybe we need to find a different solution. So I think the process is definitely set up for out-of-the-box thinking.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Madam Clerk, anybody else in the queue?
No, Deputy Mayor Kaufman, there's no one else in the queue.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, the three of you. Appreciate the presentation, the information. If you want to take a seat in the gallery safely, that would be appreciated. We have a resolution from Councillor Crowson. Now, Councillor Crowson, are based on what you heard from Councillor Carlson earlier, are you wanting to amend this to send it to audit instead of council?
Yes, I would like to send the policy to audit and send the rationalization to council to divide it.
Excellent. Madam Clerk, if you want to tell me how you're doing that, I would just ask you to read the resolution.
Yeah, we're just amending the resolution on the screen now,
Thank you.
so everybody can see it. And okay, so that the Community Issues Committee forward the report to the June 1st meeting of council. Is that what we want? And then the asset,
That's correct.
and then the policy to a future meeting of audit.
Yes.
To return to council when?
I can't remember when audit is meeting again, so I couldn't give you a date.
Okay, so we'll just say by, Tony
Point of
wants to.
clarification that, so the way this is structured is there's a policy to be reviewed and the framework would attach to that policy. So the policy can be reviewed by audit at any particular point in time. Council can approve that policy and everything, and then we can go into that trial period of working with the framework as we suggested. So it's the policy that's driving it. The framework just sits as an attachment. They're not two separate things. They work in conjunction.
Did you want this to all go back to council at one time then, after it goes to audit, or?
Yes, send it, then we can send it all to audit and they can all send it on to council.
Okay.
Yeah.
If that's what my colleagues agree.
Okay. So we'll say to the next meeting of audit,
Sounds good.
and then a future meeting of council, then on to a future meeting of council. Sorry, I don't have the dates of audit with me. Hasn't been scheduled? That's why. Okay. He's- Okay. So Deputy Mayor Kaufman, that the Community Issues Committee forward the Asset Realization and Facility Divestiture Council Policy and Framework to the next Audit Committee meeting for consideration, returning to a future meeting of Council. Councilor Croson?
Thank you very much. Councillor Croson, did you want to speak to that?
I think we've sort of discussed it quite thoroughly. This will just give us a chance for audit to review it just because there are financial implications. And so unless there's any questions or debate from my colleagues, I will call the vote.
Madam Clerk, is there anybody in the queue?
There's Mayor Spearman.
Mayor Spearman?
That was my question from before, so I'm not really in the queue.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Carlson, would you want to send, certainly this would be to all members of council, but Councillor Carlson, you're the one who raised it. Would you be able to send your questions, comments, and concerns to Audit Committee as well?
Will do, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. If there is nobody else in the queue, Councillor Croson to close.
I'll call the question.
Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Hearing none, that is carried. Members of council in chambers, are you requiring a 5-minute bio break?
Yes, please. Yes.
I'm hearing yes.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, we will begin the next presentation then at 3 o'clock. That gives you 9 minutes.
Madam Clerk, if you're still there.
Yes, I am.
The build presentation never loaded on my device. I'm not sure. Has it been uploaded to the website now?
If you look at agenda packet, not agenda, it's on that. So you can't look at the agenda, look at the agenda packet.
Okay, I will go back and reload the agenda packet. Thank you, Councillor Croson.
Yeah, could certainly be, yeah. Or the service from that building might be relocated to a different building, and then, yeah, so there's all kinds of options that could fall out of this. We just try to pick one that is best for the purposes of the presentation. Actually run through the framework to.
Well, part of our process too is to crunch numbers, provide the data. But at the end of the day, someone actually has to
we have everybody back and ready?
Not yet. There's no one around the horseshoe yet.
We have quorum on phone.
I was just going to ask. Let's get going.
Yeah, we're all here. Go ahead.
I'm here. You gave them time.
I think we're short one. I think we have 4 on the phone and 5 in person.
We aren't doing anything for a bid here.
It's CIC. So as soon as one person hits the horseshoe, let's go.
Yeah.
Can members of council please return?
Councillor Morrow is here now, so you could go ahead if you want. We have quorum. Oh, he's walking away. He's getting some water.
Do you see other members in the room?
Yeah, okay. So Mayor Spearman is here. Yep, we're all here. You can go ahead now.
Excellent, thank you. We will resume the meeting. I can't see you, but I can hear you. Thank you. Okay, we will resume the meeting. Item 4.2, a presentation regarding residential construction.
Excuse me,
industry
do we have
update.
order in chamber,
Yes.
please? Deputy Mayor Kaufman is speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Can't see anybody, but I can hear them. So, we'll move on with item 4.2, presentation regarding residential construction industry update from Perry Neufeld, President, and Bridget Mearns, Executive Officer, Build Lethbridge Region. Please come to the podium. Thank you very much for your presentation today.
Yep, there we go. Well, good afternoon, everybody, Mayor and Council. It's great to be here and great to talk with Mr. Dalton for the first time. Just before we get started, I would like to take this opportunity to, I'm a little choked, thanking Jody for all of her work as the acting and interim CAO, and not just that, your tremendous career here at the city. It was, on a personal note, a great pleasure to work with you on that side of the horseshoe and also on this side. So thank you very much for all you've done for your many years of service. I'm Bridget Mearns, the Executive Officer of Build Lethbridge, obviously, and with me is Perry Neufeld, who's the President of Build Lethbridge. And we'd like to present to you today, if you wouldn't mind. This is what we'd like to present. So today I'd like to give you a brief introduction just for Mr. Dalton. I know that we'll have opportunity to chat more about the industry and our association and how we work together, but I will give you a brief introduction to the association. I'd also like to provide you with some housing stats from the last 3 years and a snapshot from where we are the first 4 months in 2020 as opposed to the first 4 months in 2019. I'll briefly update you on what the other levels of the association are working across, both provincially and federally, so that you have a full picture of what the recovery looks like across the association, across the country. I'll review a few factors that are affecting the industry, and you'll note that many of the concerns in the industry were pre-COVID, but they have been amplified by this pandemic and hasten the need for reevaluation. Finally, I'll review some recommendations for recovery, but also for a deeper understanding of current processes and barriers to development that will need to move forward beyond recovery. The residential construction industry goes well beyond the home builder. As you can see here, home building is actually 23% of our membership. The majority of our membership are the businesses that support home building. A note, a single family construction will partially employ 60 to 75 people. So it goes well beyond just the home builder. We're part of a three-tier association, so Build Lethbridge being that municipal level, Build Alberta is the provincial level that deals with the provincial issues, and the Canadian Home Builders Association, or CHBA, is the national level that deals with national issues. The 2019 economic impact numbers indicate that Lethbridge residential construction industry in new home construction, renovation, and repair is one of Lethbridge's largest employers and is essential for the long-term economic strength and prosperity and will play a large role in the recovery efforts. Last year, the industry supported 3,243 jobs and $227 million in wages. Ooh, that's tiny. What you'll see there on the left side of the slide, first starting with the housing permits over the last 3 years, you'll notice a decline. Over the last 2 years in single-family homes, there's been a 32% decline. All of this represents well below the 3 and 5 and 10-year average for the industry. As we've discussed in previous presentations, this is happening across the province and the country with few exceptions. A significant factor has been the mortgage stress test, which you're all familiar with by now, and the Alberta economy. I'd also like to draw your attention to the amount of residential lots being developed in 2018 and 2019, and we know that development in 2020 will be significantly lower. This indicates the future building expectations. Looking at the housing permits for the first 4 months of the year versus the first 4 months of 2019, you will see a 28% decline. With the ongoing challenge of the COVID and the general economy, we expect the gap between 2019 and 2020 to grow wider. As an essential service, most of our members continue to provide new construction, renovation, and repair services. The industry and the members have developed and implemented enhanced measures to ensure the health and safety of the staff and the public is top priority while meeting the needs of Lethbridge residents. On the right side of the slide are the impacts of COVID. I want to thank City Administration, specifically the Planning and Development and Inspection Department, for working with us to ensure that the safety of our workforces and the development continued, specifically Maureen Gehring and Carrie Crump. Their efforts assisted in safe inspection and helped reverse a ministerial order that inadvertently was going to prevent development permits from moving forward. This partnership between us and the provincial and local government has preserved thousands of jobs, protected workers, and the public. CHBA, or the national effort, you've had a chance to review this in advance, so I won't go through it, but I will highlight 2 areas, specifically the 30-year amortization and addressing the stress test. This continues to be top priority at a national level. As we move through the crisis and slowly begin to reset and recover, it'll be important for policymakers to consider a range of options to support buyers, homeowners, and renters and help them hold on to their homes, which is becoming increasingly more important. A theme overall for all levels of the association, and it's captured here as well, is to ensure regulation and red tape do not excessively delay home supply and or increase cost to construction, reducing affordability. This includes the National Building Code. Build Alberta is the provincial level of the association, and they deal obviously with overlap with the federal, including the stress test. In this case, the provincial association is asking for a provincial solution to the mortgage stress test. Build Alberta is also asking for the creation of a provincial renovation tax credit for renos, not just for energy efficiency upgrades, but all kinds of upgrades that helps Albertans remain in their homes and meet their needs. This stimulates investment. It supports the renovation sectors. It protects against the underground economy, which is important to protect consumers from unprofessional and fraudulent companies. We further encourage a focus in the government investment in shovel-ready but shovel-worthy projects, which I know this body has also supported. Factors affecting residential construction. Obviously, the impact of COVID is unpredictable for all of us. One of the things of note that we really don't know how it's going to impact is what happens with the university going online. That takes a lot of renters out of the market, and for how long will that be? So there's a number of different factors that don't just affect our industry, but industries that affect our industry are being affected. The continuation, obviously, of the stress test. The Alberta economy. Coming out of recovery looks a little bit different for us here in Alberta than it might in another province. And consumer confidence will obviously play a role. The Conference Board of Canada has said that they've seen a slight rise in consumer confidence, which is good news. However, there continues to be a low consumer confidence in spending, making large purchases over the next few months. And hopefully as things settle in and people have a little more certainty in their lives, we'll see that go up. Low interest rates, this is a good thing for the industry. It does provide opportunity for people to get into the market or move within the market. Housing values seem to be holding, which is great. There has been some contrary information regarding that, but all indications show that housing value is maintaining its value. The key factors for housing objectives obviously is affordability, and there are three factors that affect that: housing price, which is supply and demand; the economy, which is jobs and wages; and of course government policy, which is where you play a significant role. So this is one of my favorite sayings from our buddy Will Rogers: if you're trying to get out of a hole, stop digging. And I think this sort of resonates with a lot of us coming into this recovery and trying to figure out where we go from here. Well, the critical work associated with managing this crisis is far from over. We understand government turning their focus on economic recovery efforts, and we applaud the city for taking the lead here in Lethbridge. Leadership from the political branch will be important as we move from recovery to permanent improved outcomes. As I've mentioned before, challenges in the industry have been significant for the last number of years. Doing things the same way will not yield better results. Every business has had to reset, reevaluate, and reorganize to meet the current realities. Now is the time for the industry and the city, with the support of City Council, to work together to evaluate internal processes and determine barriers to development, review design standards to find cost savings and increase land efficiencies. This includes looking at arterial roads and underground infrastructure design. Review the off-site levy, both the short-term and long-term. Review the assessment treatment of vacant service land as it relates to tax. Freeze or limit development building costs for 2 to 3 years. And work with the industry on payment options to assist with liquidity in cash, which we know will be an issue moving forward. And to identify and reduce red tape that causes delays, which can be costly in terms of time, money, and resources. I must point out that the work has already begun on many of these issues, and I'd like to thank the members of administration that have been working with us on that. But this is a good opportunity to dive deeper into some of these areas that will require council commitment as we move forward, as it involves some levels of service. Though hampered, the residential construction sector have been able to operate through the crisis, providing an essential service by giving Lethbridgians into their new homes. In the recovery period, governments working with the industry to streamline processes and stimulate residential construction, economic growth, and jobs will be a vital part of successful recovery. With that, we look forward to continuing to work with you on the collaboration we've started and to move forward with the Lethbridge Community and Economic Recovery Committee of Council and prosper together. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Meering. Is Mr. Neufeld having anything to add, or is he there to provide emotional support?
He's here to any questions you have specific to industry related. He's here to support for that, and emotional support is always welcome.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both for being here. We do have some questions. Mayor Spearman.
Thank you for the opportunity. If we can go back to the last slide, which just talks about how we work together, and basically the issues on the right there, alignment with city strategic plan and specific items. I will say, with respect to your recommendation to the provincial government to provide incentives for people to do home renovations, I asked that question in the Mayor's Town Hall last week. The Minister of Economic Development was on the line and seemed surprised by the question. So I'm not sure that they have an answer yet at the provincial government level. So I'd recommend you continue your advocacy efforts in that way in support of the city and other cities across Alberta to make sure that happens.
Thank you.
But certainly with respect to aligning with what we can do, eliminating barriers, for example, at City Hall. We'd be interested to hear, as we have our committee, what are the barriers specifically? Are there things that we can target in the near future so that we can be ready for phases 2 and 3 and beyond to make sure our city moves forward effectively and efficiently? Or would you report directly to us or through the chamber or EDL, or how do you anticipate eliminating barriers, or are you working currently with our city administrator?
Well, we do on an ongoing basis work with administration to identify some of these pinch points, but some of them are going to be digging deeper into level of service, and that's obviously the purview of City Council. Working with your council committee on recovery, that's something that we would directly work with you on. Our members and our developer council and our builder council have been working on identifying specific places and touch points and pinch points and places where we think there can be some improvement. So we'd be more than happy to meet, and that's what we are suggesting, that we meet with your recovery council and provide those.
Okay. So our subcommittee on those types of things, we want it to be fluid and effective. So the sooner you can get your recommendations to us, the better.
How is it that you're anticipating moving forward? Are you having just written proposals, or will there be an opportunity to meet, whether it's via Zoom or Teams or however?
I think we haven't figured that quite out yet. We have the subcommittees, but what we want, the idea of the subcommittees is so you don't have to make appointments for formal presentations to council, so the information can come through the subcommittees. And then the subcommittee can keep reporting on an ongoing basis to council with recommendations.
Right, and I see that we're under the business sector, which is yourself, Councillor Parker, and Councillor Campbell, I believe. So I guess when you...
Now Councillor Higgin, Councillors Campbell and Higgins, or Councillors Higgin and Campbell switched places.
Oh, did they? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I'm out of date. So once you know what the preferred avenue to get information is for you, we're more than happy to accommodate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I just was wondering, I mean, it comes before us a lot, the issue of secondary suites in various zones. Where are we with that in terms of red tape, or as far as, rezoning, as far as saying we need more secondary suites to enhance the company, perhaps having an area in the city that's dedicated to the secondary suites? What's the latest?
So the latest that I can report on is it was at the CDC, or the Community Design Committee, for discussion, and I know that there's been consultation out in the community regarding what is acceptable or what people are comfortable as far as density targets are concerned, and that's going to form the MDP. But I'm not sure. Maybe is Councillor Marashiro on the line?
Councillor Marashiro?
And the reason I'm calling on him is he's the chair of the CDC, and that was one of the issues that have been coming forward. So, and maybe Councillor Kaufman, if you have any further information.
Thank you. The last conversation we had about it was still really regarding the I'm just trying to gather my thoughts here because I wasn't prepared.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
We'll get back. We'll get back to Ms. Mearns on where exactly it's at on CDC. I know that we did look at we certainly did look at the bylaw and changes the bylaw, but we've had to have a little bit more information provided on that. I am at a loss at the moment as to where exactly we are. Councillor Miyashiro, are you still there? Councillor Croson, since your memory is better than anybody's.
Not today, it isn't, unfortunately. I'm in the same place. I just can't remember where we are on that.
I think that
Okay,
we were discussing this, and then all of this hit, and I think it was a bit on pause. I do know our developer council did meet with some of our builder members to talk about secondary suites and what they think of moving forward, and specifically looking at that 100-meter rule and what some of the other municipalities like Calgary and Edmonton are doing. So we do have some of that information to report back.
And are a lot of the builders sort of saying this is really an option we have to really look at, or?
The option is available in other municipalities in different ways. It's absolutely a legitimate and well-used form of getting into home ownership and staying in the single-family realm, which is part of it. It's density, but it really is about single-family. That's happening all over. The good thing about having it in an organized way is obviously you know that it's being done to code, and we're not pushing this kind of demand underground,
right,
which is what we want to avoid.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You talked a little bit about residential lots. Do we have given COVID now, especially in the drastic slowdown in the residential building industry, are we at beyond a 2-year surplus in terms of available lots at the moment?
Is this on? Yep.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Last I checked, we were in that 800 to 900 kind of vacant residential lots in the city. I haven't done any calculations recently, but with the slowdown, my guess right now is that we're definitely beyond, and in projecting the amount of permits this year, we're definitely beyond the 3-year mark in my estimation. Right? We always like to find a balance of about 1.5 to 2 years of available inventory so we can respond to the needs of the public. But in this case, I think to a number of factors, there's probably a 3 to 4 year supply on the market to date. And that's a very general, again, haven't pulled up those numbers recently or done the or filtered through them with the types of lots and sizes of lots and stuff like that. So that's just kind of my general sense since my last review of that. So.
Thank you. If it's not going to be overly onerous, I think council would probably appreciate seeing where we're at, just so if we have any decisions to make regarding Lethbridge land, we can take these factors into consideration as well. Okay. Bridget, you had on the second last slide talking about some of the review work. You have arterial roads on there. What has cropped up there?
So arterial roads is a big one that's kind of been on our agenda for a while. These are things where we're looking at design standards around the size and width of roads. There's all sort of complexity that goes into that, but it's something where we feel there could be some opportunity to really look at costs moving forward. Just a simple example would be we've moved to 75-meter roads. By moving down, and the reason we did that was sound attenuation, and the idea is these roads are faster, higher kilometer-an-hour roads. They create more noise, therefore there needs to be more buffer around these roads. Because of changing situations, cars are quieter. There's other opportunities and technologies for sound attenuation. Usually it's not within a city, it's something you see outside on more major ways, but this is something we can look at. So even going from a 75-meter to a 45-meter, that can increase the lot inventory available in the community by 122 lots, and what that means for a municipality is obviously this is more developable land that you're building a tax base from. The other sort of things we've been looking at is design, lighting standards, roundabouts versus four-way signaling, all of those things. Some of those things are nice to have. Are they needs to have? Are they needs to have? Are they need to have? Do we need to have them? And is there an opportunity there to maybe pull back a little bit? And that might be a level of service discussion, but there is opportunity there to make development less costly.
Thank you. I think under COVID, needs to have is acceptable grammar, so that's okay. I'm going to assume that some of these changes then come from us. They're outward facing in terms of standards that we have addressed, but not necessarily in consultation with industry.
Yeah, so some of this conversation is happening internal, which is fantastic. But as I said, some of this is going to be level of service decision. Looking at that list, sort of just to take a little left turn here, is land assessment. So one of the things that we talked about looking into 2021 is the land assessment value on vacant serviced land. This is an opportunity to help the development community and builder community regarding carrying costs. So this is land that has service to it, and we've already heard how much land out there already has this service. Being able to see some relief on the cost of that land, it's going to be sitting there for longer before people will be building on it. So here's an opportunity to reduce some developing and building costs, but that would require a directive from City Council to examine how vacant service land is treated.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Acting Mayor Parker.
Thank you very much, and thank you to both Bridget and Perry for your presentation. What is, obviously you're very close and in touch with the real estate industry in regards to houses being built, houses being sold and all. What is the number one reason why people are hesitant right now? Is it based on the fear of just going out there and looking at houses, or is it the fear of job security? What would you say the number one issue right now with the buyer?
Since COVID, you mean?
Well,
or for the last few years?
Last 3 to 4 months, because the COVID just added on to it. But obviously there was a trend leading into it.
Well, the trend had to do around the mortgage stress test and the Alberta economy. I think regarding COVID, I think there's some great uncertainty, and everyone had to take a little bit of time to catch their breath, not knowing what they were dealing with. Our industry was really quick in responding and moving to virtual tours and show homes, making sure that they have health assessments at the door. You ring a doorbell, there's a camera, they talk to you before they let you in. It's by appointment only. So our industry has adapted quickly to make sure everybody's safe, both the public and the workforce. But I think people are catching their breath. I think they're honestly trying to figure out what it looks like moving forward. I think there's a lot of uncertainty.
And I think, not so much a question, but a perspective viewpoint I see is, I see a lot of people, the interest rates are low. The Bank of Canada has been very, very aggressive on that. And of course, it's more of a buyer's market. Do you see this coming to fruition that, going into the summertime and all that things will pick up? Are you optimistic? I know, now it's rose-colored glasses, but those two things have to work together, that good things are going to happen.
It's definitely one of the things we pointed out in our slide, that interest rates is a positive factor for the industry. I think it's really hard to predict, but one thing I can say is this is a pretty resilient industry, and Canadians are wanting home ownership, and they're attracted to development. So obviously we're optimistic. We want to be optimistic, and I think we are.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there anybody else in the queue?
No, Deputy Mayor Kaufman, there's no one else in the queue.
Any additional questions from members of council online or on phone? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, Ms. Mearns, Mr. Neufeld, for your presentation. We appreciate the information. If you want to take a seat in the gallery, we'll deal with the resolution. Now, I believe Councillor Miyashiro may be having some technical issues at the moment. So I have asked Councillor Carlson, could you take this resolution?
Certainly, Deputy Mayor. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. I will read the resolution first. I just want to make sure that you weren't having technical issues. So,
nope. The wind caused my phone to go out once, but I'm good now.
Excellent. Stand with your back to the wind. I have a resolution from Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Community Issues Committee accept this report and presentation for information. Councillor Carlson. Councillor Carlson?
Sorry, I put myself on mute and started talking away. I did just want to thank Ms. Mearns and Mr. Neufeld for the presentation and the information they provided to Council. I think it was fairly apparent in the presentation they've got some ideas to bring to the table for our Recovery Lethbridge task force. I believe it's Mayor Spearman, Councillor Parker, and Councillor Higgin that will be reaching out to build and connecting in the future. So thank you for the presentation. Thank you to my colleagues for the questions and discussion, and we look forward to working together in the future.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there anybody in the queue to speak?
Mayor Spearman.
Mayor Spearman.
I'd like to thank our presenters today. Certainly, the members of BUILD are key to the economy of Lethbridge. The jobs they create, the wealth they create is going to be an important part of recovery. And it was a very timely presentation and a very timely reminder that working with BUILD, eliminating barriers, eliminating red tape is going to be essential to recovery in the city of Lethbridge. So I do thank our presenters today.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, anyone else in the queue?
No, Deputy Mayor Kaufman, no one else.
Thank you.
Councillor
Councillor
call for the
Kaufman,
vote.
close.
I'll call
Question
for the
has been
vote.
called. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. Move on the agenda to presentation 4.3, Pathway 24 project. Mr. Dave Ellis, Parks Manager. Mr. Ellis?
He's just still coming in here, so just so you know, Deputy Mayor. As your acting mayor, I'll be your eyes and ears down here.
Thank you very much, Acting Mayor. Maybe while he's making his way
Deputy
in.
Mayor,
He's here now.
Councilor Miyashiro.
Yeah, sorry, I had to leave my office for a minute. There was an issue.
Not a problem at all. Thank you. We resolved the issue. Councillor Carlson carried your resolution.
And Mr. Ellis is at the podium. It looks like he's just about to get ready here. I'd give him about 10 seconds, and then there you go.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Whenever you're ready.
Deputy Mayor Kaufman, Mayor Spearman, members of Community Issues Committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide you this update. First of all, I'd like to mention that Pathway 24 is our project number. It's not a path name, and we certainly don't want that to stick. But I'm here today to provide you a background on the area and the context, a planning background to date, public engagement background, and project purpose and objectives. So the area in 6 Mile Coulee on the screen is approximately 124 hectares in size. It is on the west side of Lethbridge College, below Gold Canyon, towards the river, and going north towards the Country Club golf course. So it's a very large area. Currently, there are no developed pathways for accessing the area. Ecologically, it is the healthiest riparian area in the city, mostly because it has been largely undisturbed over the past. The area does have some significant archaeological sites currently being addressed by the province. Until recently, the area was remote enough that use was limited to the foot traffic. Recent development and growth in the south area of the city and the increase in mountain bike trail riding is driving the need for efforts to treat the area more like a formal park. Mountain bike trail riding has become more popular in recent years, and it is growing, particularly in 6 Mile Coulee. After the 2012 Alberta Summer Games or Southern Alberta Games, the college used this area or an area up and around the college as a mountain bike track for the mountain bike race. The pathway is designed to be a bit of a hybrid, not typical to our other pathways in the city. It will function more as a walking trail than a multi-purpose pathway, which we typically build. It will be constructed of crushed limestone, and it will only be 1.5 meters wide rather than the 2.5 or 3 meters wide that we typically do. And it is 3.1 kilometers long. Construction costs include a proper bridge, some stairways, the environmental rehab after construction. The environmental assessment has been completed and the package is ready to go to tender now. We expect the bidding on the job will be quite competitive, just basically because of our current economic environment. I know we have contractors that are looking for work for this summer in order to keep their staff employed. And timing of the work is scheduled for the summer and the fall of this year. For the planning background, it is quite long. In 2007, the Bikeways and Pathways Master Plan was developed through public consultation, and it identified and recommended a strong desire for a pathway access through the river valley. Of particular concern was the missing north-south connection lost in the 1995 flood that connected the river valley just between the country club and the river, and that flood washed out that land. The connection from Indian Battle Park to the south end of the valley above the country club was seen as one of the higher priorities in the recommendation of that plan. Also in 2007, the Parks Master Plan recommended that the 6 Mile Coulee area be designated a preservation park in order to preserve the intact ecological aspects of the area. In 2017, more recently, recommendations were made in that report to construct a formal trail into the area and to designate a formal preservation park in the area. The recommendations further suggested the establishment of a Blackfoot interpretive experience in alignment with the directions in the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan. Our public engagement processes have been fairly extensive through the development of these master plans and pretty much parallel the master plan developments. So in 2006 and in 2007, there were several public open houses and stakeholder engagement workshops to engage the public and to engage the stakeholders in the development of both the Bikeways and Pathways Master Plan and the Parks Master Plan. More recently, in 2015 and in 2016, both stakeholder workshops and public open houses were well attended and participated in and were the base and are the basis of the content of the River Valley Parks Master Plan, which was completed in 2017. The 2018 to 2027 Capital Improvement Program, specifically Initiative D11, specifically identifies this pathway as one of the projects. And that was one of the topics of discussion during the public engagement process of budget approval. In preparation for construction, this pathway was highlighted as one of the projects that was reviewed last March 2019 at an open house here in the foyer. An online discussion continued past that in order to gain more information. Although public engagement processes didn't and probably never will reach complete consensus between stakeholders or members between the public, the understandings and the compromises used to create the plans have guided processes subsequent to the plan's acceptance. As the individuals of the trail riding community have become more organized, their acceptance of the outcomes of the public planning process has seemingly diminished from the face-to-face discussions they held with stakeholders who are equally passionate about their causes. Just to discuss a little bit about who was involved in the process for the River Valley Master Plan. The general public, of course, were always welcome to attend. There were groups representing the walkers. The running community was represented. Bike riding was representative, both from a standpoint of the trail riding community and that club, as well as general bike riders who don't have an appetite for risk and adventure like the trail riding community does. Bird watchers are a very active recreational activity in the city and does attract visitors from outside of the city. Naturalists and ecologists were, of course, there in full force. Some of them have most keen interest in plants, rare plants in the plant community. Others are more interested specifically in the animals that inhabit the river valley. Dog owners were there, which represents a significant demographic in the city and their desire to have some recreation with their dogs. The groups that lease portions of the river valley, including the gun range and ball players, were involved. Private landowners were invited and participated. Adjacent landowners, so the people who back on to the river valley, were included and involved. Equestrian use was included, and the ATV clubs made a brief appearance and felt that they should have some access for activity in the river valley. I just want to review very briefly with you some of the guiding principles that were used to develop this plan. And each of these principles has specific and a number of objectives. The first one was to conserve the natural landscape, enhance wildlife habitats. Third one, ensure sustainable use and management. Make the river valley accessible, ensure safety, connect parks and pathways, improve valley amenities, honor the natural and cultural heritage, and inspire stewardship. And as I mentioned, each one of these has specific objectives, which include the inclusion of mountain bike riding in the river valley. Just like to talk more specifically about the project purpose and objectives of this project. It includes equitable access to public parks, safety, preservation of the natural assets and ecology, connectivity and looping of the pathway system, providing some balance to use in the river valley, access to 6 Mile Park and to Blackfoot interpretive areas, and to mitigate ongoing degradation, which is evolving. Firstly, I'd like to talk about equitable access to public parks. What that is access to areas and our public park areas by the general public rather than individuals or exclusive groups. It's an important consideration in all aspects of parks planning. Currently, 6 Mile Park is not closed, but it is not particularly inviting because it doesn't have equitable access into the park. It does have access into the park if you happen to be an athlete or you're adventuresome or you're a trail runner or a biker, but generally to the general public, it's not really an accessible area. We have experienced objections to this principle from people who back on to public parkland, particularly above the river valley. They bought those lots and expected the public land to provide them some seclusion and some privacy. That's in contrary to public land being available to public generally. We heard the same kind of opposition from the same people who are objecting actively to this development when we built a few years ago the pathway below Heritage Heights, down the river valley, underneath the train bridge in past Elizabeth Hall wetlands that connects to the pathway that was built along Bridge Drive. Since we built that, last year we measured the general public are using that over 20,000 times in just last year. In 2020, with increased use of the pathways, particularly this spring, the projection of use there is going to be in excess of 31,000. We do have 21 counters that we deploy around the pathway system in various places at various times. And they consistently show us that our pathways are used, at least on they don't show us our pathways are used. They show us that the points at those 21 locations where the counters are installed are used at least 1 million times a year and up to 1.5 million times a year. And our spring counts are up 20% of what they were this time last year. Truly, our pathway system is the most popular multi-purpose recreational facility we have in the city. I'd like to talk about safety for a minute. Safety is always an important consideration and something we take very seriously. And we considered that from twofold. One, the elimination of hazards and risks that are unnecessary and undue and maybe unexpected by the general public who use an area. And we consider the opportunity of first responders to both understand where the problem is, access it, and get out of there if they need to require or if they need to provide assistance. Now, this picture on the screen is an example of one of at least 3 bridges in the area that crosses the creek that runs through 6 Mile Coulee. It's certainly not built by the city. It does not meet any safety standards. It's just some planks that are nailed together and dropped across. Certainly not a very safe situation. Part of our concern is that we've known those bridges are there for quite some time. And because we know about it and really do nothing about it, it's in essence providing tacit approval for those bridges, which makes us somewhat liable for any accidents which might occur there. So this project includes an engineered bridge, something that's built properly. Preservation of the natural assets is critical for an ever-growing nature-based recreation to be available into the future. Parks do play an important role in preserving both animal and plant species. Many forms of nature-based recreation occur in the river valley. I've mentioned some of them. And education happens, and for the variety of experiences which take place in the river valley to continue into the future, adaptive management needs to be followed, and park management needs to be followed. A well-established principle in park development is that a formal trail does a lot to preserve the area. By and large, people are respectful enough that they will use a trail if it's there, and they avoid walking off and meandering around and creating random trails that go different places. If a pathway is there, most people are respectful enough that they will stay on it and use the pathway. And so a pathway is actually a method of preserving sensitive area. Connectivity and looping is very important to people, and we've heard that time and time again. The 6 Mile path will initially connect from the pathway that drops out of the Sugar Bowl down to the river, just on the south edge of the Country Club Golf Course, and it will connect from there through the valley to the pathway which is on the south side of the college. This provides looping opportunities to both Scenic Drive and Mayor McGrath Drive and into the neighborhoods. Balance is important to us and always considered in our planning process. Many municipalities have addressed balance in the past, and some more successfully than others. Balance and restrictions on the number and the location of trails have been adopted by other municipalities successfully who were able to sit down with their trail riding community. None of these municipalities permit continually building and evolving trails. Trails are identified, planned, coordinated before they're built rather than after they're built. We are starting the process. This spring, we have sanctioned 5 trails near Whoop Up Drive in Indian Battle Park, where these are designated as mountain biking trails. It's a very small start. It's not enough to sustain the demand for the sport, but it is a start, and we're going to learn what we learn and move forward from there. It's a little bit premature for me to stand and introduce this next slide, but because it's part of the planning process, and I did mention that our River Valley Parks Master Plan does indicate that we should provide some interpretive experience in 6 Mile Park. I'll address it here, but I do want to mention that we're just at the very start of the planning process. We're actively working on it and hope to have an initiative ready for council to consider in the next capital improvement program, if not for construction, at least for the engagement process with the Blackfoot elders in the community. But there cannot be a destination without access. The first step in this process is to provide formal access into the area. So from there, we can start to plan and work on the specifics of what this interpretive experience might look like. The areas in pink on the map are identified as being significant from an archaeological standpoint. For the planning of the park, we will need to obviously transport the planning committee, including elders, into the area. We can't do that on existing trails. So really for this process to begin in earnest, we do need to provide some safe access, at least to get the planning committee into. There is evolving and ongoing degradation that is happening in the area. It's not as bad as what these pictures might suggest. I mean, this isn't everywhere, but it is there. I took these pictures a few weeks ago. Typically, when you have single-track, undeveloped pathways, they get used until they erode or they get too deep, and then you move beside it. On the right side, that is ongoing construction, which started this spring. This S-curve with banked corners is being done right now. This section isn't even connected to a pathway. It's not part of anything, but they're building the S-curve first. So this is built on a side slope so that bike riders can ride down quickly and bank up around the corners. So I don't feel status quo is really an option. Doing nothing will lead to more and more path development. In the River Valley, we have 1,200 segments of pathways that are single-track pathways that total a distance of 213 kilometers. 6 Mile Coulee, which I've shown here, has 32 kilometers of undeveloped, random kind of single-track pathways. There has been, as I've mentioned, new construction happening this year, and we are receiving an increasing number of complaints from the general public concerned with some of the activities. Last year, quite a few, and already again this year. Groups that are doing this construction claim to be sanctioned by the city, and they claim to only use game trails, and neither of those is necessarily true. So in summary, we have aligned this planning and this project with plans developed through extensive public and stakeholder engagement and the general public. And I believe we're at a crossroads. We either need to start treating 6 Mile area and the park as a park, or perhaps let it go be a mountain bike playground. And with that, Deputy Mayor Kaufman, I thank you for the opportunity for being here, and I'll do my best to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis. Appreciate the information. We do have some questions. Acting Mayor Parker.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis, for the presentation. It gives us a lot of context and a reminder of why this was approved during the CIP deliberations. When complete, and I have a few questions here, would it be similar in regards to the look of the Bull Trail that's near Ridgewood? Would it kind of have a similar look to it in regards to that stone, that kind of width and all that?
It'll be made of the same crushed limestone. It'll be a little bit narrower than that. We built a pathway around Riverstone that was only 1 meter wide, and we found that was just too narrow to be comfortable for people, so we're widening it a little bit to 1.5 meters.
And second question is this part of our master plan of the integrated trail system bringing our whole city together? Is this a big link?
It is. It's been identified as a missing link since 2007 when we did the Bikeways and Pathways Master Plan.
Thank you. And my third and final question is, this will allow not only pedestrians, people with their dogs, anyone in this area to use a nice, safe path, but also allow mountain bikers to use it as well. Mountain bikers could still use this path, or are they not allowed to use this path?
No, of course they can use it.
Very much.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Parker. Councillor Hagan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Question I have, thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Ellis, is you said we can't do status quo. Now, I may not support, but I'm quite a realist, I think, and that people will still find where they want to go and they'll still go. Not sure if this pathway is going to change where they ride. If we put a path there, all of a sudden the mountain bikes are going to go on throwing stuff, are going to go on this pathway. I don't know, do you find that, or is it your experience in the past that if you put a path, mountain bikers just follow that path and they won't go elsewhere?
We're at a beginning point of working with the mountain bike community to develop a system for mountain biking, and our objective is to provide a balanced area and enough trails to make the sport exciting. And what we're hoping in exchange for sanctioning some of the trails that they value is that the ad hoc construction and ongoing construction stops. It may not entirely, but in other municipalities, that's how it works. They've reached an agreement that the municipality will provide sufficient and adequate trails to develop the sport, and that's what they'll use.
But looking at the plan for that particular area, this conversation will come after the proposed construction of I don't want to say Path 24, but you've said don't use that word. But this construction project, these conversations will continue after then, or is that what you're?
Of course, they're happening now. We've got 5 trails that we've designated and sanctioned, which means they can ride on those trails and not be in contravention to a bylaw, which says they can't ride off developed trails. That's the start, but that once we get those in place and we talk to them more, there'll be others coming because 5 isn't enough for the sport.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
Great, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. You were probably well aware, and as all of our council members are aware, we've received overwhelming negative response to this project that are totally opposed to it, saying that none of what you were trying to do is actually being done. I just want to get your response to all of the negative feedback that you've gotten. Now, is that a vocal minority? Do you have support of many others, or how would you address that?
During the development of the River Valley Parks Master Plan, the same discussion came up, and it was balanced with other users of the River Valley. And so through discussion and through consultation back and forth between different interest groups, the ecologists, the bird watchers, the trail riders, the general public, the recommendations of the master plan were arrived at. And at that time, there was agreement in the principles. And I did question the draft and wanted to make sure that the principles that were arrived at were in fact agreed on, and the order of them being considered. And I was assured that, yes, that's what the process yielded. So there is a group, the mountain bike trail riders particularly, who have organized themselves through social media very well. And unfortunately, you've received a bunch of emails in the last few weeks, as have I. But that is that opposition is not balanced with everything else we heard in the development of the master plan.
Do you foresee giving it a second thought, putting in their comments, or is this what you have is what it's going to be?
Well, we've obviously considered their comments, and we're not wrecking their trails. There's 231 kilometers of single track trail in that area. We're going to use 3 of those kilometers. So we're using 10% of what's there now for their use, which should be enough, I would think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Miyashiro.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Ellis, for your presentation. Further to what some of my colleagues have asked you, is it, especially what Councillor Higgins said, if you build a path, they're just going to ride their bikes wherever they want anyway. I mean, if they don't like that line, they're going to create their own, and I see that in some of the coulees on the north side where there's not even supposed to be bikes. Is it possible to? First question is, when does this money have to be spent by?
Well, I'm not sure.
Is there a deadline to spend this money?
I'm not sure there's a specific deadline. for it. I mean, certainly it's part of this CIP, so our objective was to spend it before we come to council asking for more CIP money. But I'm not sure that there's a specific deadline. It is funded mostly through gas tax, so I'm not sure if there's a deadline on using that.
Okay, so I guess further my question is if you go ahead and build this pathway and there's so much more existing track that people can use for cycling or whatever, and this is hypothetical, is it possible to do what they've done in other municipalities and create a mountain bike park and give the responsibilities to the cycling groups for maintenance and safety? So it would be city land, but those groups would be responsible for maintaining everything, like we've done with other facilities in the city. Is that a possibility?
Well, that was the intention when we built the mountain bike park just off of Whoop Up Drive. And the Lethbridge Area Cycling Association was going to look after that. And they have done some work last year, and hopefully they'll continue with that. They are agreeing to do some of the maintenance on the sanctioned trails, and they are following through with that. So I believe our partnership, although it's in an infancy, I believe in the longer haul it will be productive and it will achieve what you're asking for.
Right. So similar to what they do in the Red Deer area with the Central Alberta mountain biking community, they actually do look after the mountain bike park on municipal land.
Correct. And we're not quite there yet, but we're working towards that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Ellis, for your presentation. What is the tourism potential of mountain biking?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
What is the tourism potential of mountain biking?
There is some tourism potential. I know municipalities like Fernie and Whistler and other communities do use mountain bike, their facilities for some tourism. Mountain biking is an established sport and it's an international sport. And so there's obviously some opportunity for tourism there. And Lethbridge is blessed with some great terrain, and we produce some very skilled riders because of that terrain and the opportunity they have. And so certainly our objective is to work with them and develop something that will be tourist worthy.
Thank you. As the parks manager, would you agree, as many specialists do, that we actually made many of our playgrounds much too safe for children?
Our playgrounds must be safe. Sorry.
Much too safe.
That is a shift that has happened since the Canadian Standards Association wrote their guidelines. And we've heard that before, and anybody that's my age remembers risky playgrounds, which seemed way more fun. So that is a current theme in the industry right now. There is some discussion going on with risky play and deciding exactly what that means and what as a risk means that's not a hazard kind of thing. So in the industry there is that discussion. And certainly in the adventure playground we're building in Legacy Park now, that is part of the equation. Make it a little bit more risky and hopefully more fun.
So we have seen a kind of a paternalistic attitude in playgrounds. Do we have the same in pathway development where we think we can build them better than others?
Well, the purpose of this trail is really not to replace a mountain bike trail. It's not to impact that sport. The purpose of this trail is to provide equitable access by the general public. So people that are not athletes, who maybe don't feel confident riding on a single track dirt trail, who still deserve, as the public, to access the area and to enjoy our public parks. So it's really, the construction of this pathway is really not about impacting the mountain bike sport. It's about providing access for the public into an area that has potential for some interpretation and a lot of enjoyment, because it's actually a very gorgeous area there.
I'll step out of questions like this right now. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Crowston. My favorite toy, we never called them dangerous parks, we just called them parks, was something called a whirlybird, which was a seesaw that spun around. I miss those days, absolutely. Acting Mayor Parker, who said he's not old enough to remember these types of apparatus.
Is that a question? I didn't hear what he said there.
Yeah, you're up. You're
thank
up,
you.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you. We, as a corporation, take a lot of pride in protecting our river valley and our coulees. We do that through policy, through bylaw, through things in regards to, for example, being we don't allow development, we have setbacks, all that kind of stuff, because the community has value. And I've heard people say to me, and it's important that we protect our river valley and our coulees. And I'm not saying anything bad about mountain bikers and all that, because I think it's great that everyone's halfway. But would you agree that mountain bikers can be very harsh on our prairie landscape? If you get 5 or 6 mountain bikers, could they, like a lot of these paths you see they make it themselves. Now, if we did that in other areas of our city, if cars just drove around and made their own road paths, there would be a fine or a charge to that. Are we looking at finding ways to? It's easy, we're all having a blind eye, but if you have hundreds of mountain bikers going all throughout the coulees and all that, creating their own thing, you could really tear the heck, for lack of a better term, out of our river valley system.
I have read studies where the impact of mountain bikes is between motorized vehicles and foot traffic. It is more than people walking or running, just because of the weight on a very small footprint, I guess, of the tire. So there is more degradation because of mountain bikes than there would be on foot traffic.
So my question to you is, how do we decide as a corporation? Because I took my son for a walk last year behind Gold Canyon, and back there, it says you can't have any bikes, you can't have any of that, you have to be on foot. So it actually said back there, you can't bring your bikes back there. When do we decide this right here is, because by us allowing it, it pretty much says you can bike wherever you want. What are the standards so you choose this area right here as not mountain bike and this area here as mountain bike?
Our hope is that as we develop a sanctioned trail system for mountain biking, that it will be centered in those locations and the use in other areas will become less acceptable and decrease. Because right now, it's happening all over, as you say.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Morrill.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Ellis, I thank you for being here, but I'm a little bit, this is one of the 4 projects that Council had visited, and were 4 of the projects that out of the KPMG report were suggested that we do not proceed with them. This was one of the 4, correct?
That's right.
Okay, and so recently, I don't know what meeting it was, Council already approved this project. I think the vote was 7-2. So this project has already been approved.
On March 9th, that's correct.
On March 9th. Okay, so my question is, and I think I understand why you're here, because we've been getting a lot of opposition to this project. But really, why are you here? Like, what Council can't make any decisions here. The project is a go unless it's at a public meeting of Council where we revisit this, and I don't know if we can revisit this anyway. So is this just to educate the public or to make the public feel good, or why are we having this presentation?
Let me chime in. Yep. This was at Agenda Review Committee's request. So at Council's request, we are here to do an update. There's no question the update was driven by significant opposition because this particular this biking community that's opposed has been opposed all along to the development of this trail. It's been a number of years that we planned this trail, this path into 6 Mile Park, and they have never been accepting of the fact that the plan was to turn this into a more multi-purpose, multifunctional, more accessible pathway than what they currently have, because they enjoy what they have today.
But you're right, we're not here asking for council to reverse the decision. In fact, I would suggest that the parks manager is here to tell you the exact opposite, that all the planning that's been done since 2007 would suggest that nothing has substantially changed. And in fact, in terms of the pathway network and a commitment to investing in it is still a valid project, and this is a valid investment. And we're here to suggest, in spite of this most recent resurgence of opposition to this project, there's no reason for council to reverse course at this particular time. They did, in the context of operational reviews and revisiting this project earlier late last year, earlier this year, that was about fiscal constraint, and I think we've already had that vote around whether or not to turn this project off, because we haven't, and there is still an opportunity. If council at the next meeting, regular meeting, is opposed to spending this money for fiscal reasons, they could reconsider it again. But
can we?
I think
Sorry,
I think we should just check procedurally.
Isn't
with
there
that.
a 6-month thing that we really can't?
Yeah, I can't comment
Okay.
on that, but you're right. We're not here to suggest that you revisit that decision to amend the CIP and delete this project. We're here just to inform you of what it is exactly that's proposed in this park area and what this pathway is intended to accomplish based on a prior decision to invest.
Okay, so you said in your reply, you mentioned that this has been in the books since 2007, and you've been working on it since 2007. So that's 13 years ago. I'm assuming that 13 years ago, we didn't have the bikers as we do today, and I'm assuming, based on my information from talking to the bike shops, they're selling bikes like crazy. Some people are having difficulty even finding bikes. Because of COVID, people are now more into biking. So, plus the fact that we have our river valley as natural, because in the past I have had people tell me that we should have beautiful grass down in the river valley like we do up in our park areas, because they would go down there and enjoy it more. So my question is, do we have to, and I know this is since 2007, but this is 2020 now, do we have to continuously build, and I'm a path guy, I've always have been one, but do we have to continuously build these paths to the standards that we've had in the past when people are now maybe saying, we want more natural, let us do what we want to do, we're going to ride where we want to ride, and so on and so on. So, you know, if we're making decisions today based on, or March 9th or whenever it was, based on 2007, I really am starting to have a problem with that, because times have changed.
That's correct. And lots of people own mountain bikes, including myself, who would not engage in this sport. I mean, I'm well past that.
Right, me too.
It looks
Me too.
fun, but I'm past that. But we're not really doing this to oppose the mountain bike community. We're doing this to allow the public equitable access. So I might ride on an asphalt or a granular pathway that is safe and not quite as risky. I certainly would walk on it, as would many people. So this pathway is designed, it's a hybrid, it's narrower and a little bit more rugged. It's more of a hiking trail than it is a multi-use pathway. So this is an evolution of our park pathway development. It's not the same as what we've built in the past.
Okay, and my final question, because there are people, I think I heard you say in your presentation, that want this because it's safer, easier for them to walk. You get rid of the hazards like the bridges and what you've identified. But this path is narrower, and if I'm thinking, you're going to have now more walkers if they're not walking there already, because we're creating a more walkable path, so I could walk it. You're going to have more people. The bikers aren't going to go away, while they might. So now you're going to have more of an interaction between people on foot, people on just regular bikes, people wanting to go crazy in their... So are we really accomplishing anything by doing this? Or are we creating more of a hazard and a more dangerous situation where we're trying to put everybody to fit, again, one size, and, this is the path and you're all going to enjoy it.
Right. This opens up 124 hectares of basically new parkland for the general public. And so it may not increase the conflict, but it may decrease it in Indian Battle Park and other areas where it's occurring now and spread that same users out over more area.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you. Everyone's thanking everyone.
Thank you, Councilor Morrow. Councilor Croson.
Sorry?
Councilor Croson, you're next in line.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. You've been stating that the mountain biking community is against this. Is it not also true that runners and racers are also against this because they don't like the crushed limestone? Is that the only option for this track?
It's certainly not the only option, but it is considered to be probably one of the better options because it will impact or absorb some of the impact of other uses. But really it doesn't, it's not meant to replace the single track running trails. There's 31 kilometers of running trails in there. And this is just 3 kilometers. So it's really not meant to replace what is there and to take away from the functions that are there now. It's meant to add a new function and a new use, a new accessibility to the area. So some runners may like more even ground. More seasoned runners or those that like trail running enjoy the experience of uneven ground, and it's trail running, and that's what they do. And we have some events in town that are drawing tourists, and they're very popular. So there is an element of the population that are active athletes that enjoy that kind of experience. There's others who don't, and perhaps they will use this pathway because it'll be a smoother surface for them without the risk of twisting an ankle or something. But that doesn't replace something that's being used now.
And what will be the ongoing operational cost for a limestone pathway?
It's very little. Typically on a pathway through the river valley, we do a shoulder cut about 1 meter wide on each side. I don't know, because this is going through short grass area, that we would even do that. Probably not. It would require every few years probably some top-ups if there's any erosion that happens, or if there's slopes that don't have stairs. We'd have to clean that up and replace some of that limestone that has maybe slid down the slope. But it's minimal expense ongoing.
And how is the accessibility with stairs?
The accessibility with the stairs is, I believe, what I heard.
Yes.
We put in stairs where the slope is too steep, that if it's, and we follow accessibility standards, so above a certain grade, we use stairs. If it's below that grade and more gentle, we don't use stairs. So we do follow accessibility standards in deciding where stairs need to be and where they don't need to be. And that is one of the things that makes this project kind of pricey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Croson. Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. Do we know how many people use the trail right now and what the balance is between mountain bikers and runners and members of the general public?
No, because these aren't sanctioned or city-built trails. We don't have trail counters on any of them.
How accessible is this trail? It seems, I'm just looking at the map, and it seems to be kind of hidden behind the college type of thing. How many people are aware of this trail?
Well, judging from the number of single track trails that have been developed, certainly the athletes who engage in mountain bike trail riding and the runners enjoy that area. In talking to the general public, not a lot.
So most of the people who currently use the trail are runners or mountain bikers, is that correct?
From my understanding, that's correct. Those are the ones that are opposed to this.
Okay. So our recommendation is to take a trail that's already being used by mountain bikers and runners, and turn it into a general use trail. Is that correct?
Correct. And open it up to the general public.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Councillor Hagan.
Thank you. And just add to that, I think we've got hundreds of kilometers of these pathways already, correct me if I'm wrong, right?
Over 200 kilometers.
Over 200 kilometers. Okay. I've got a question regarding process, as it's been discussed here a little bit. Is coming back to council next week, or is one coming back to council next week, or is this just a discussion? And unless there's a resolution that comes from council, do we, Madam Chair, do we know where?
Councillor Hagan, the resolution is from CIC to just accept the report and the presentation for information. If any member of council wants to have a further conversation about it at the next meeting or subsequent meetings, they would put in a resolution.
Okay. Furthermore, again, and I'm sorry, I probably go back and find this, or I can go back and find this. What is the cost of this again? What is the 1.7 was it? 1.7. Okay. And for the kilometers again, it's three kilometers? Yeah. 0.7. And my last question, if I could, if a resolution is to come forward, we're talking about this 6 months and it can't come back, and for process, can one come forward? City Clerk, is that something, if we've already decided last month, as Joe had mentioned, can we bring this back?
I believe you can reconsider a decision within 6 months. So there can be a reconsideration, but it would be a reconsideration. It wouldn't be a new motion. So
the reconsideration.
You're fine.
you've made a decision in the last 6 months on this,
So
I
you
understand?
So,
You could reconsider it.
so to bring a resolution forward, I could not. I would just have to bring one that was already, just repeat the exact one that we already had discussed.
Yeah, you would be reconsidering the one that you've already made a decision on.
Okay, thank you.
Unless the action has already taken place, or a contract or something has taken place. But
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
To answer the question about costs, the reality of our pathway system is we've built everything that's easy. Anything that's left as far as connections is expensive. So bridges, staircases are expensive. It was expensive to build the pathway below Heritage Heights, but it's getting used now. So our easy pathways are done.
Thank you. Councillor Hagan, if you are considering bringing something forward, you might want to work with the clerk about the notice to reconsider. Acting Mayor Parker.
Thank you very much. And so I just want to reiterate and ask this question. I want you to reaffirm this to me. Integrated trail system is a big project, a big priority of past councils and this corporation. Am I correct on that?
That's correct.
And what we have here is a pathway that's been pretty much used mostly by the mountain biking community. And we're creating a path that it's going to be enhanced, that both mountain bikers can still use, as well as the greater community. Am I correct on that?
That's the goal.
Second, perfect. And lastly, you said it's going to be quite a competitive process, and usually competition means maybe more competitive pricing. Would I be correct on that?
That's what we're anticipating.
Thank you very much. Oh, actually, I do have one more question, if I may.
Go ahead.
So when I read over these letters, it sounds like something is being taken away. And when something's taken away, people are like, they get fearful. And you made a great presentation today. Is this presentation going to be online as well in a hard copy? So the people that have written these letters, I even got one from our Honorable MLA, Phillips, who was kind of opposed to it. Will they be able to get the facts and information via downloading it and seeing it on the website? That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Ellis, you had mentioned that you're working with the cycling groups. Which group are you working with?
Particularly with the Lethbridge and Area Cycling Association. They were the ones that we worked with through the development of the mountain bike park, and the ones that we've had the most contact with. We understand that there's 3 clubs in town. but this one seems to be most representative of the trail riding community.
Okay. So is your intent, I'm not certain as to how you were addressing this in your presentation, but is the intent to move to more of a Fernie crow's nest path type of relationship where the Councillor Croson was alluding to earlier? The city kind of steps back, and if we put organizations in charge of these things, they are the ones who become involved with the policing, with the design, in consultation and conversation with the city. Is that what you are intending to move towards, or is it just a conversation of alternatives in lieu of this path?
I think the model that we're envisioning isn't turning the management or the development of trails in the river valley over to one particular group, but I think the objective is more to work cooperatively with them in order to provide reasonable access to trails that meet their needs.
Okay, thank you. Just a clarification then as well on in terms of public communication. Reached out in 2005, 2006, went back out with the master plan. Really the last conversation that we've had with the community was in 2016, and it was in the context of the Parks Master, the River Valley Master Plan, as opposed to this particular stretch. Is that correct?
No, we engaged through the capital improvement program open houses and the public input into that approval process. And then last spring in March 2019, this was one of the storyboards that we highlighted future projects on, as well as online continuing after March, after the open house. But this was as recently as March 2019 in the discussion forum with the public.
Okay, thank you. And so just a little further clarification on that. Did you present D11?
Yeah.
When you had the March 2019 public open house?
That's correct. We've got 3 pathways on there, and they were on there for discussion.
Okay. Finally, you mentioned as well this opens up 124 hectares of parkland. Does that create the opportunity for rogue individuals, whether they be cyclists, runners, whomever, to use this pathway as a new starting point to access currently virginous landscape?
I'm sorry, what kind of landscape?
New landscape, new opportunities, areas that they haven't been able to access at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. This is a large area of the river valley, which is by and large unexplored by the general public, and this will give the general public an opportunity to explore and broaden their horizons and explore new areas.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there anybody else in the queue?
Deputy Mayor Kaufman, Councillor Morrow would like to speak.
Sorry, Councillor Moore, I had you on my list. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I'm just, sorry, I need to follow up on the questions by Councillor Higgin in the reply, maybe the city solicitor or someone. So this was approved in our CIP, which went through the CIP process. We then revisited it again just recently because of the operational review, and it was approved again. I voted against it, so I would love nothing more than to have it come back. But if we're going to follow a process, my understanding is that we just can't keep reconsidering the vote of council. So this here, unless nothing, in my understanding, if there's no significant change in the project, we kind of have this thing going where we do not revisit, or else we'd be revisiting every resolution constantly. So I thought we kind of agreed that this cannot come back for at least 6 months, or if there's a significant change. And I haven't heard any significant change in this project. So I would really like clarification, because I think we need to know that now, because I'm assuming Councillor Higgin may be I'm anticipating he may bring a resolution forward, and I don't know if that's part of what we've kind of agreed on. I don't think it's a policy, but I would like a clear understanding of that.
Madam Clerk, you addressed process. Did you want to do that again, or does the solicitor wish to talk process?
I don't see anything in the procedure bylaw about 6 months unless with regards to reconsideration. So reconsideration is a two-step process where you would put the motion on the floor to back it out, reconsider it. If that gets majority vote, then you can go ahead with a new motion. But I'll hand it over to the city solicitor in case he has anything to add that I missed.
Thank you, Mr. Solicitor.
I don't really have anything to add to what the comments of the clerk are. The procedure bylaw speaks to reconsidering the same motion. If it was in some material way a different motion, then perhaps it wouldn't be a reconsideration motion. Would be my only additional comment.
Thank you. If I can, Councillor Morrow, I think where some of the challenge arises is that D11 is, as Mr. Ellis identified, 3, I believe, maybe even 4 trails lumped together. There's not a great deal of information in them. Council approved the suite of trails and then were inundated with these responses from the community. So that is where what the impetus was for putting this on the agenda, having Parks come back and explain to us the context behind what has happened in our community. I think if somebody was going to put forward a resolution, it would be just a resolution on this particular trail as opposed to the entirety of D11. Does that sort of clarify direction? If members of council have contrary thoughts to that, I think that's where we're sitting at the moment.
Councillor Kaufman, can I just ask another question then?
Absolutely, you bet.
Okay, so where are we at with this project? Like, have we put it out to tender? Like, how far along the line are we with this?
The design has been completed. We did the environmental assessment this spring. The tender package is with procurement now, just waiting to go out. So it's ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, anyone else in the queue?
No, Deputy Mayor, there's no one else in the queue.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis. Appreciate the information and for taking the time to come to council today, come to CIC today. Thank you. If you want to take a step back and have a seat, we'll deal with the resolution. I have a resolution from Acting Mayor Parker. Be it resolved that the Community Issues Committee accept this report and presentation for information. Acting Mayor Parker.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. And I just want to thank Mr. Ellis for his presentation, answering the questions, putting context, and reminding us of the importance of this project. And I would just ask for CIC support.
Madam Clerk, is there anybody in the queue to speak?
Not as yet.
Acting Mayor Parker to close.
Question?
Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Hearing none, that's carried. Members of CIC, I'd like to continue on unless there is an objection. We need a break. I'm not hearing any objection, so we're going to move on to presentation 4.4.
Everyone left. Everyone's not. No one's here. I'm just joking.
You know, they could. I'd have no idea. Lethbridge Paradise Canyon Open Event postponement. We have a presentation by Mr. Doug McLaughlin and Mr. Ron Sakamoto. If somebody could usher them into the chamber or call them into the chamber, and when they're ready, they can begin.
You got our presentation. Did you get the PowerPoint? Different? Okay. Ready to go?
Ready when you are.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much. Not sure who is chairing today.
Above us. And his name is Deputy Mayor Kaufman.
Deputy Mayor, Your Worship, members of council. Thank you very much for this opportunity. We have a bit of a formal presentation PowerPoint. It's pretty short. I'm going to run through it fairly quickly. First, just to give you a bit of a background to the Mackenzie tour and the Lethbridge Paradise Canyon Open for those that may not be familiar with it. It goes back to August of 2017 when there was a small group, including Ron Sakamoto, appeared before council, and an agreement made a presentation to bring the Mackenzie tour to Lethbridge, and an agreement was struck between the City of Lethbridge and Paradise Canyon for funding over 3 years. And it was set out in the contract for 2018, 2019, and 2020, very specifically in the contract. I think, as everybody's well aware of this year, things are not happening. That's probably the simplest way to put it. And we were due to host the tournament in the last week of June of this year. That's not going to happen. None of the tournaments up until, I think at this point, they're looking at the slight possibility of something maybe late July. But the whole tournament schedule for the Mackenzie Tour is up in the air. We've looked at the alternative of maybe trying to rearrange dates for our Lethbridge tournament for the Paradise Canyon Open. And the Paradise Canyon people do such a great job that the dates that they think might be available when regulation relaxes, they're full. So it is, that is something that just isn't possible to do. So with government regulations, the COVID, and the border closure, because 90% of the players are coming in from outside the country, the majority of which are American players, and who knows when that's going to happen. So decisions had to be made. So we have made the decision in conjunction with the PGA Tour that the tournament for this year will not happen, and we're here to request that the funding that was contractually agreed to be pushed over to 2021. Okay. Slide, please. Thank you. For those, again, that may not be familiar, the Mackenzie Tour, as you can see, is part of the PGA Tour family. It's one of 5 subsidiary tours of the PGA Tour itself. It shows the web.com over on the, what to me is the left side. That is now called the Corn Ferry Tour. That's the step below the PGA. The Mackenzie Tour is one step below the Corn Ferry. So these are young fellas that are trying to work their way onto the PGA Tour. The top echelon of the Mackenzie move up to the Corn Ferry, and then the top echelon of the Corn Ferry move up to the PGA Tour. There's also the Champions Tour, which is the golfers that are age 50 and over. And then there's also the Latin American Tour and the China Tour. And at this point, all are canceled. The PGA hopes to restart 2 weeks from now down in Texas. That's the schedule. That's what it is today. That's the last we heard as of 11:30 this morning. We'll leave it there. Slide, please. Okay. PGA Tour Canada, as I said, it's young fellas trying to work their way up to the PGA and provide a forum for them to grow and advance as golfers, and also to provide something for the fans, the sponsors, and the local communities and the volunteers. Slide, please. Mackenzie Tour has a pretty substantial impact right across the country. raised in 2019 somewhere in the neighborhood of over $5 million right across the country. So lots of media exposure for every community, including Lethbridge. And I'll touch on specific Lethbridge numbers in a couple of minutes. Slide, please. With regards to the Paradise Canyon Open, it showcases Lethbridge as a premier golf and travel destination. We know for a fact that we're getting people coming to Lethbridge, and they play at Paradise Canyon. They also play at a lot of the other courses. One of the things we have heard from people is that they love the idea they can come down here, they can stay in one location, and they have 5 or 6 different courses within 30 to 45 minutes, and good quality courses. So they love coming here. It also gives us the chance to create a week-long celebration, and we had some pretty interesting plans for this year that would augment the tournament itself, that would involve a junior qualifier, which would enable juniors, one junior from each course in southern Alberta to try for the one exemption spot we would give into the tournament. And every course was going to be able to put up one junior to try for that. We had worked with the people at Paradise Canyon, and we were working with the 2 native bands adjacent to Lethbridge to put together an Indigenous youth golf camp. And I stress golf camp as opposed to 2018 where we did a 1-2-hour session with youth. This was going to be a 7 event over 7 weeks that would involve instruction. It would involve each of the junior members or youth members having a dinner afterwards and having a speaker that would be allied to golf, but would be at a minimum an Indigenous sports figure. So we were working on that. And then as well, in order to involve the wider golf Southern Alberta community, there was going to be the opportunity for somebody to step up and win $1 million in a closest to the whole competition that the college and the university were going to help us run, and would enable them to garner some charitable dollars out of that. Slide, please. So all of these events were going to take place either prior to, during, or including the golf camp would extend into the first week of July. We've already seen that Paradise Canyon has proved more than capable in hosting the event. The tour people have been extremely excited about coming here the first 2 years. They're looking forward to this year. They're looking forward to next year. We have a very capable committee in place, currently sitting tight, waiting to see what's going to happen for next year. We have in excess of 200 volunteers that have been very active in the tournament over the last 2 years, and just about all of which have indicated they're willing to come back for next year. The tournament would bring in 156 golfers for the tournament itself, plus there would be those coming in for the one-day qualifier, which takes place on the Monday, which would have taken place out at the Picture Butte Golf Course. And of the roughly 135, 120, 125, 135, somewhere in there, only 8 of those would be making it into the tournament. So there's a lot of interest in coming here. Some of those stay over. And then in addition to that, we also get a lot of family members, the caddies, players, officials that come down here. So there's a very direct economic impact. And I think with everything that's going on right now, I think that it's our opinion that the grant dollars that were contractually agreed to with the tournament and with Paradise Canyon, using the metrics that the PGA Tour has used, They estimate that the $250,000 that was the grant from the city would turn into an economic benefit of somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2 million. So you get about an 800% return on the money. I don't know of any other event the city participates in where you're going to get an 800% return. In addition to that, I think that we feel that this will be part or would be part of the economic redevelopment for Lethbridge, for the business community. There's a lot of, just about all the players, they stay in hotels, they eat in restaurants, they spend money. Their families come to watch, they stay in hotels, they spend money for meals, etc. It's all going to help rebuild the business community in Lethbridge. And we can see already that there are businesses that are not reopening and will not reopen after what we've gone through and what we're continuing to go through. So we see this Lethbridge Paradise Canyon Open as part of the economic redevelopment for the city and the businesses. Another, just we go back one. Another part of the, I think when you get to the some of the intangibles, it's not the meals, it's not the hotels, but we also see the media impact. The PGA Tour is able to track the Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook engagements, and I don't know, I'm not a real tech kind of person, but they have ways of measuring how many people are looking at these things and actively following them. And the measurement just for the Lethbridge tournament is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 900,000 views and engagements and following. They're not all following. I'm not going to misrepresent that. But there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 900,000 people that have seen the name Lethbridge. And so it's getting our name out there. It creates a real sense of civic pride. When I'm talking to people, when I have the opportunity to travel, and I mention where I'm from, they say, "Oh yeah, we saw that on the golf show, or we've seen it on the PGA Tour site." That's where you have a Mackenzie Tour event. Our name is out there, and it's out there in part because of the Mackenzie Tour event that comes through Lethbridge. So that is not anything that you can put a dollar value on. That's in that, as we've seen on TV, the priceless stage. So, but it's another part that's going to help this city, help the business community in this city and Southern Alberta redevelop as we come out of the COVID crisis. Our ask is simple. All we ask is that what has been previously agreed to simply be shifted from 2020 over to 2021. We'll put on a tournament. We'll put on a great tournament. Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Thank you for the presentation and the information. I do have some questions from members of council. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Gentlemen, thank you for the presentation and all the information you provided. I had actually buzzed in to speak before you got to your second last slide there where you touched on some of the questions I had. So just to help me out, you talked about the economic impact. I think that was on slide 5. And then when you got to the second last slide there, I think you talked about the local impact and about its effect on recovery for certain sectors of our economy. Do we track, we always use the STEAM model for economic impact on these events. Do we actually collect any data? I've been asking for this for all our events for years, on the hotel usage, et cetera, et cetera. Do we have any of that data?
Are you asking me, Councillor?
I'm asking if you collect it, or maybe through our city manager or designate, to our community services if we could try and collect that data so we have some way of tracking the impact rather than just relying on the STEAM model, which is a buck in spits $8 out or whatever it is. And I'm not sure if anyone can hear me. Everything went quiet.
I think they're searching for an answer, Councillor Carlson.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Councillor Carlson. This is Lori Harrison.
Hi, Lori.
Hello. The PGA itself does use STEAM when it reports to us the economic impact of its event each year. And I'm not sure if you recall, but we use a different tool that was created by Travel Alberta and Economic Development years ago that only measures the direct impact of an event, making assumptions on the hotel usage and restaurant usage based on the type of event. So we have two very different numbers because we are making assumptions, but based on looking deeper into the potential economic impact. So I could provide you with each of those. I can look them up if you would like, but we don't actually go to the hotels and ask them how many rooms were booked. I do believe that the PGA does use the university's residences and that there's a lot of billeting involved as well. And I think that Doug could probably answer that for you.
And maybe while Doug, Mr. McLaughlin is looking for that or coming to the microphone, we don't reach out to the hoteliers or the Lethbridge Lodging Association. Are they supportive of this event?
Yes, they are. I can tell you a couple of specific figures. I know that there were, I believe the number was 56 players stayed at the university in their hotel, as they call it. They use the residence for the summer as a hotel. I know there was quite a number stayed at the hotels over on the east side of town. There was a number that rented local properties, Airbnb, but they were all going out to eat. I can tell you from experience, these young golfers are like junior hockey players. They don't cook. Junior hockey players do cook, but you know, given the opportunity, they'll go out to eat, and they don't spend huge amounts because a lot of them are on limited budgets. But they go out to eat. They go out for breakfast, and they go out for supper, and they will augment the milk that they drink with a couple of other beverages over dinner. But that's about it. But they do go out to eat, and they spend a fair amount of money, and their families spend money. I've talked to quite a few of the families over the last couple of years working at the tournament, so I know that happens. I cannot give you any other specifics than that, but I know in talking to the hotels and from dropping the players off from time to time at the different hotels last year, for example, I know that quite a number of them stayed at a wide variety of places around town.
Thank you for that. Further, it would be nice to see if any of the hotel associations or the restaurateurs that you've spoken of would be willing to write us with letters of support. That would be nice to see. Another question I had, I know that with COVID, other orders of government have put out stimulus funding or lost revenue funding. Is there any possibility of reaching out to those funding streams?
I'll be quite honest, at this point, because we are not an employer, we can't get the wage subsidy, and because the players are not employees, and the majority of them are Americans, I don't think they're going to qualify for the, is it the CERB? The Emergency Response Benefit that Canadian employees are eligible for if they can't work. We're not a large dollar company, so I don't think that we're going to qualify for the major government program. To be honest, the Lethbridge Paradise Canyon Open is not it's not a legal entity as such. That's why the original contract was struck with Paradise Canyon. We're not going to qualify for the small business loan with the deductible or with a forgivable portion. So out of the COVID programs that I'm familiar with, only because of watching the news on occasion, I don't know that we would qualify for any of those.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you've actually contemplated that. Appreciate that. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson. Mayor Spearman.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm very interested in the development work you're doing with young people and young Indigenous people. Will that go ahead in any form this year? What will we do to continue to develop players in this area and develop the interest in golfing in this area?
There's no lack of interest in golf in this area, for sure. If you've tried to get a tee time in the first few weeks of the season down here, you would find out pretty quickly that it is difficult to do. With regard specifically to the Indigenous Youth Golf Camp, we had submitted a couple of different funding proposals because it was all going to have to be funded through sponsorships. We had submitted a couple of different funding requests, both of which have now come back in the negative. And because we didn't know when or even if this was going to take place at the time, and this goes back to the end of March, when this was, when we were getting these answers and being asked the question about whether it would take place, we've had to, at this point, that has been shelved for this year. We will look at it again for next year to see if we can pull it together and get the funding. And this is funding in excess of what would be for the tournament itself. That program was going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of just over $50,000 to pull together, because we're including we're asking somebody to donate clubs. We made a he's still here. We made a very good deal with Paradise Canyon for meal costs, but we have to compensate the people that are providing the instruction. We're looking at reimbursing expenses for speakers that were going to be coming in. And so it's not something you can, I don't have 50 grand sitting in my back pocket that we can fund that kind of program. But we think that if everything will move into 2021, we'll reapply to the outfits that we spoke to previously. There was interest. There was a lot of interest. We had committees from each of the two bands that we were working with to try and make this work. And there was a lot of interest from each of those committees and with each of the bands. So we'll do the best we can. I know that in talking to a number of the courses around Southwest and Southern Alberta, that the junior qualifier was raised a lot of interest, because it is not often that a junior gets to play in this type of tournament. And so the courses thought this was a great idea.
Right now, of course, there's a huge challenge with people wondering what to do with their time. That's why I ask, under COVID-19, if there's any possibility of retaining some aspect of that in order to give people a chance to continue to develop on it, so if they take a year off, they're starting all over again next year type of thing. So any opportunity we can to get our younger people under development using the resources, and I fully understand the economics of this, so that's a challenge. From the city's point of view, of course, we've got a selfish interest in, when we're committing $250,000 to something, and of course, what we want to do is publicize the city of Lethbridge and the assets we have, and so in that respect, what can you tell us about continuing to be able to do that? What can we do under COVID-19's conditions to continue to promote the city in a responsible way as a place to put on your calendar for next year?
Well, I think that number one would be to show that the city of Lethbridge is open for business. And one simple way to do that would be to move that money from 2020 to 2021. Secondly, I think that in doing so, publicizing that. And these days, you don't have to spend a lot of money to do that. Social media will look after that for you, for us. And I think that one of the things that the PGA has done just over the last couple of years now has been by being able to track these types of, I use the phrase metrics. By being able to track those types of things and know how many Twitter impressions, how many Twitter engagements, how many Twitter followers, Instagram impressions, engagements, Facebook impressions, etc. They know that the word is getting out there, and that can be continued and can be fostered and grown some more. So I think that that can be done pretty easily. I shouldn't say easily. It can be done, but can be done relatively inexpensively. And today, I think that's a crucial point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Madam Clerk, anybody else in the queue?
No, your Deputy Mayor, there is not anybody else in the queue.
Excellent. Any more questions from members of council? Okay, hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. We appreciate the presentation and the time you took today to come to see council. If you want to take a seat in the gallery at a safe distance, we have a resolution. I have a resolution from Mayor Spearman. Be it resolved that the Community Issues Committee accepts this report and presentation for information, and further be it resolved that the Community Issues Committee forward this report to the June 1st, 2020 meeting of Council for consideration. Mayor Spearman.
I think it was very helpful to have the presenters here today.
Microphone, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do appreciate the presentation today, Mr. McLaughlin, and certainly the impact that that this tournament, the Mackenzie Tour Tournament here at Paradise Canyon has had on the city, and we do look forward to considering your requests at next week's City Council meeting. But thank you for your presentation and for answering our questions today.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Madam Clerk, is there anybody in the queue to speak?
No, Deputy Kaufman, there is not.
Thank you. Mayor Spearman, to close.
Just call the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Hearing none, that is carried. We have two final resolutions. I believe that Ms. Moncrief actually sent out an amendment on resolutions 5.1 and 5.2. So I have a resolution from Councillor Croson on 5.1 COVID-19 update. Be it resolved that the closed meeting discussions with respect to COVID-19 update remain confidential pursuant to sections 18, disclosure harmful to individual or public safety, and 24, advice from officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Councillor Croson.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Hearing none, that's carried. Move on to 5.2. A resolution from Councillor Croson, financial sustainability strategy. Be it resolved that the closed meeting discussions, reports, and attachments with respect to financial sustainability strategy remain confidential pursuant to sections 24, advice from officials, and 25, disclosure harmful to economic and other interests of a public body, of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, and further be it resolved that administration proceed with the recommendation provided during the in-camera meeting discussions and return to the June 15th meeting of City Council. Councillor Crowson.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Hearing none, that is carried. I have a final resolution from Councillor Higgin that we do now adjourn the Community Issues Committee meeting until Monday, June 22nd, 2020. Councillor Higgin. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Hearing none, that is carried. We are now adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
I'll
Madam
see
Clerk.
some of you tomorrow at
Appreciate
OEG.
9 o'clock tomorrow morning, correct?
No, 9 on Wednesday. OEG is 1 tomorrow.
Rob.
Thank you for the clarification.
All right, I'll see you. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you.
Participant exiting.